Chapter 851. Dwayne Dantes' new business. Leonard stared intently at the portrait of Sherlock Moriarty. His brain had just imagined what the latter would look like without glasses or a beard. Although this could be quite different from the actual situation, and was more of a product of imagination, Leonard increasingly found Sherlock Moriarty very familiar, as though he had known him before. How is that possible? He's long dead. And I buried him with my own hands. Leonard couldn't help but shake his head as he muttered with a scoff. Just as he said that, his expression froze because the person in his memories held a huge secret. This person had strangely escaped the influence of 2-049, without the help of others. This person used 2-049's uniqueness to finish off a sequence 7 Beyonder, and back then, he was only a seer who isn't good at combat. This person had managed to summarize the acting method within a very short amount of time, and he had advanced to sequence 8 at an extraordinary pace. This person possessed a high-sequence sun domain charm, and had used it with Captain Dunsmith, who wielded a saint's ashes, successfully finishing off Megos, who was pregnant with an evil god spawn. This person's sequence 8 Beyonder characteristic had been taken away by Ensanguil, but Captain Dunsmith's sequence 7 Beyonder characteristic was left behind. Perhaps it wasn't because Ensanguil had taken away the Beyonder characteristic which had appeared, causing it to be missing from the scene, but that it had never formed to begin with. Leonard Moriarty suddenly jolted to his senses as he observed Sherlock Moriarty's portrait again. 10 seconds later, he squeezed the words through his clenched teeth. Klein Moretti. He found that the mysterious detective, Sherlock Moriarty, looked more and more like his former teammate, the hero who saved Tingen, Klein Moretti. And this was under the scenario of him being without the clear discrepancies of glasses and a beard. Leonard's had fingers clenched tightly at some point in time as his joints suffused with a whiteness. After a moment, he let out a clear pant as he picked up Sherlock Moriarty's dossier again. This time, he flipped with a target in mind, roughly to the time when Sherlock first appeared in Backlund, early September. And this wasn't long after Klein Moretti had been buried. Leonard Mitchell's green eyes turned dark as he instinctively flipped through the dossier. Then he saw a name, Lenivis. This was one of the masterminds behind the evil god's descent in Tingen City. He was one of the main murderers who led to the death of Dunsmith and Klein Moretti, and the other Nighthawks. And Sherlock Moriarty's second record in Backlund was his investigations at the dock for a serial murder, thus bumping into the disguised Lenivis. After this, the true creator's plan of descending was foiled, and Lenivis died in the sewers. His body was scattered with tarot cards, making it identical in style to the subsequent hero bandit Black Emperor. He didn't forget the harm that swindler brought. Leonard whispered silently, his expression softening. He quickly flipped through the documents and sat in his chair, motionless for an extended period of time. It was as though he had fallen asleep from the shadows brought about by the light. After a few minutes, Leonard finally moved. He leaned into the chair and said in a deep voice, "Old man, do you think this detective, Sherlock Moriarty, resembles my teammate back in Tingen City, Klein Moretti?" In his mind, the aged voice said after some hesitation. "The one who joined the Nighthawks because of the Antigonus family's notebook?" "Yes," Leonard answered in a heavy voice. In his body, the parasite said after 2 seconds, "There's some resemblance." After receiving the reply, Leonard once again fell silent. After a long while, he took out a gold pocket watch and snapped it open to determine that it was still morning. Leonard snapped the pocket watch closed and stood up, nearly overturning the stack of documents. He hurriedly reached out his hand and held onto the documents. Then he left behind a note, saying that he had found certain clues and planned to head out to do some investigations, thus making it possible that he would return very late. Let me see if someone is pretending to be Tingen City's hero, or if you've always been wearing masks, a secret organization member who sneaked into the Nighthawks. Your true motives aren't much loftier than Ensanguil. You were also targeting something behind Cheney's gate. Leonard no longer had that aloof attitude as his eyes narrowed as he quickly left St. Samuel Cathedral's basement. In Hillstonborough, outside a building with quite a unique architecture, Dwayne Dantes got off his carriage and saw the building that was built in the style of the late 4th epoch. The building was mostly comprised of huge stone slabs, creating a total of 4 stories. The windows on each level were like a door, and it was matched with a tiny balcony. Its entire facade had been weathered by the elements, revealing a sandy yellow color. The stone columns and arches held up a refined porch that made it seem rather magnificent. This was the East Balam Military Veterans Mess. Klein waved his cane and pointed at the building before him and said with a smile, "It has quite a historic feel." Member of Parliament Mocked nodded in reply. "It's actually a building built in an ancient style, but it has more than 100 years of history." As he spoke, he led Dwayne Dantes into the club and said to the lady at the reception, "Dwayne Dantes, unofficial member. I'll be his recommender." With that said, he turned to the tycoon and explained, "Not only have you not served in East Balam, but you have never participated in the wars that happened there. You don't even have a military background, so there's no way for you to be an official member. However, even being an unofficial member will allow you free entry and the use of the various facilities. You will be able to enjoy the delicious food and alcohol, and get to know different friends." "That's exactly what I was hoping for." Klein nodded with a smile. After the beautiful lady who was of Southern Continent descent finished the registration, Mocked added, "There's no admission fee. It's £60 a year for the membership." With that said, he chuckled and said, "It's not expensive, even more so for you. Here you will get to come into contact with all kinds of weapons. There are enough shooting ranges to provide you with shooting practice. You can even learn horse riding. At a club of this level, £60 really isn't expensive. After all, generals often appear here, and they have many famous chefs." Klein didn't speak further as he took out his wallet. He counted £60 and gave it to the receptionist, obtaining a badge with the logo of a forest, ocean, and blades. "This is a place filled with glory. I'm deeply impressed with your contributions in East Balam." As Klein wore the badge with a number on its back, he said to Mocked, "If I wish to contribute to the cause, who should I look for?" Mocked pointed at the receptionist. "Just give it to her. She will jot it down and announce it on the notice board over there." Klein nodded slightly and said, "All right." He then turned his head and made Richardson take out the £500 he had already prepared. After giving the donation, Klein passed through the beautifully decorated foyer with Mocked, arriving at a room that resembled an activity room. As for his valet, Richardson remained outside in the break room. There were snacks, tea, and coffee there. In the small room, through Mock's introductions, Klein got to know 5 officers who were either still in service or were retired. Apart from a particular House of Commons member of Parliament, the highest-ranking epaulet was Colonel Calvin. He was presently working at the Lone Kingdom's Ministry of Defense. However, his actual position was unknown. According to what Klein knew, for quasi-high-ranking members of the military at the rank of colonel, they were mostly beyonders, mid-sequence beyonders. Mocked, Calvin, and company quickly began chatting. Klein didn't interject as he seriously listened to their conversations, occasionally echoing a sentence or two. In this relaxed atmosphere, Calvin suddenly turned his head and said to Dwayne Dantes, "I heard you were often active in West Balam?" The colonel had a long face like a donkey's, but it didn't look comical at all. His gaze was rather deep. Klein smiled and replied, "Yes, that place is more chaotic than East Balam." Calvin laughed when he heard that. Of course. Intis made too many mistakes over there. He paused and continued asking, "How is your relationship with the people from Intis over there?" Klein didn't understand the colonel's motive as he bit the bullet and said, "It's all right. They're all very greedy." In fact, he didn't know a single one. He had only heard Anderson mention a few names and their corresponding matters. Calvin nodded and raised another question. "Are you familiar with the tribes over there, as well as the resistance?" "I know some," Klein answered vaguely. He only knew one Intis military leader of the resistance. It was the former Intis princess, Queen Mystic Bernadette. Calvin laughed as he took a sip from his cup of red wine. During this process, no one spoke, including Mocked. After putting down his cup, Calvin looked at Dwayne Dantes again and said, "This is the thing. Every year we would obsolete many rifles and cannons. And directly destroying them or processing them is too much of a waste or costs too much. It's not a good solution. I'm not sure if you're interested in buying a batch and selling it to West Balam. You can sell it to the regions ruled by Intis, selling them to the tribes and resistance. Trust me, this is definitely a very lucrative business. Of course, it's also very dangerous. If you're caught by Intis in West Balam, we will disavow you. This is making me an arms dealer? This is one of the most lucrative businesses. Although I'm not familiar with West Balam at all and lack any connections, I can sell it to Queen Mystic or the resistance at the Rorstad archipelago. Klein was tempted as he deliberately wore a mixed and hesitant expression. I've never done such things before, but it's definitely attractive enough. Calvin laughed and said, "There's no need to rush to a decision. This is a very important matter that requires serious thought. Just give your answer to Macht before the end of the week." Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and nodded with a smile. All right. Tingen City. Raphael Cemetery. Although the afternoon sun was rather strong, this place remained gloomy and cold. Leonard was standing in front of a grave, staring silently at the tombstone. Chapter 852. Straight to the point. The sun hung brightly in midair. In a dark, silent corner of the cemetery, Leonard Mitchell suddenly raised the shovel beside him. The two mounds of soil at the side gradually raised in height as the coffin pit became obvious. From time to time, there would be passers-by, but they didn't notice anything, as though a dream was happening over there. Finally, Leonard threw the shovel and bent down. He reached out and grabbed the ends of the coffin lid with both hands. Using immense strength, he pulled open the heavy wooden lid, and discovered that the thick, long nails had fallen off at some point in time. There was nothing inside the pitch-black coffin. Nothing. Leonard continued, keeping his body hunched as he silently watched this scene without any further movement. He stood there like a petrified statue for a very long time. In his hazy dream, Klein saw a tombstone with an epitaph. It stood silently among many other tombstones as it was dyed in crimson moonlight. This scene shattered immediately as Klein snapped awake. He confirmed that he was still Dwayne Dantes, and that he was still inside 160 Buckland Street's master bedroom. The dream seems to be telling me something. As a seer, Klein treated every dream seriously. This was no exception. He focused and shook himself out of his state of drowsiness before attempting to make an interpretation. That's likely a tomb. This represents a particular deceased or something related to resurrection. The crimson moonlight represents the goddess, corresponding to the Church of Evernight and the Nighthawks. If I were to directly see the moon, it might involve the primordial moon, vampire ancestor Lilith, and the mother tree of desire. The tomb was dyed with a color almost resembling blood. This symbolizes something bad. As Klein did an interpretation of the dream, he gathered all the content and attempted to make an effective, meaningful conclusion. After some serious thought, he began to believe that the dream's revelation was referring to the past him and the Church of Evernight. After making the connections with what had happened the past few days, Klein slowly came to an answer. As Dwayne Dantes has repeated headed for St. Samuel Cathedral, he must have been added to a list of suspects. If Leonard hasn't left Backland, this must have garnered his attention. After all, he knows that Dwayne Dantes isn't a simple person and has mysterious origins. As an angel from the Marauder pathway, Leonard's grandpa probably discovered that the gray fog in the seer pathway has intricate ties, and knows that the corresponding sequence 0 is called the Fool. This way, they will naturally be able to make connections with the honorific name of the Fool that was previously spread, and they would believe that I'm a member of a secret organization that worships the Fool. And developing on this clue, it can also involve the person who killed Lenevis and hero bandit Black Emperor, who used tarot cards. Along with the Gehrman Sparrow clues I deliberately left behind, as well as Leonard's previous investigations into Sherlock Moriarty, it's not impossible for him to put things together and find what's highly dubious. And in the beginning, Sherlock Moriarty's disguise wasn't too good. As long as Leonard investigates seriously, it wouldn't be difficult to discover that the great detective resembled his former colleague. So he went to Tingen to dig up the grave for confirmation? As he thought about the matter, Klein pulled a back cushion over and sat up. He felt that he had already found the answer to his dream. He began seriously analyzing what could happen afterwards, considering if he should abandon the identity of Dwayne Dantes. Leonard has no way of conveying his theories and conclusion to the other Nighthawks because he won't be able to explain the key points for his inference. This will expose his own secret. Based on my experience and my understanding of him, he will steer the matter via different means. This will be more complicated and troublesome, wasting even more time. Before that happens, I should find him and give him another warning. It should snuff out whatever is on his mind. After all, the church didn't suffer any material loss, nor did anyone die. Yes, for Duane Dantes, I have taken note of the time. I specially created tracks of my activity in the southern continent over the past few months, staggering it with the decline of Gehrman Sparrow's sightings. And this involves the Intis colony, so it will be rather difficult to verify the matter. That also means that Leonard has, at best, figured out that Gehrman Sparrow equals Sherlock Moriarty equals Klein Moretti. He will just believe that I'm in cahoots with them. Part of a secret organization that believes in the fool. To him, Duane Dantes is a powerful, mysterious beyonder who can sense the grandpa in him, a demigod. This is an obvious discrepancy with the other identities. Klein soon came up with countermeasures as he turned his attention to the matter he encountered at East Balham Military Veterans Mess in the afternoon. Why would they directly seek me out for such a private arms deal? I just established a friendship with Mocht and hadn't experienced any tests. I don't deserve such trust. Perhaps it's a test? In the beginning, it will just be rifles and cannons. The quantity would probably be limited. Nor will it involve high-quality items. Furthermore, I'll need to come up with the cash before receiving the goods. If I have any real problems, they wouldn't suffer any losses. They will only suffer the repercussions of a small batch of weapons falling into hands within their own domain of control. Yes, to them, a tycoon like me, with a complicated background and a deep understanding of West Balham, really is an excellent candidate. First, I have the money. Second, I have the guts. Third, I have the resources and social connections, allowing the arms to be sold to suitable factions. Fourth, I have no background in the upper echelons of the kingdom. I can always be made the scapegoat and be abandoned. They must have sent people to monitor me in secret. As long as this business is smoothly completed, I'll be a close partner with the military. This will aid in my investigations of the truth behind the Great Smog of Backlund. The problem I have now is that I have zero actual knowledge of West Balham's resistance and various tribes. I've no idea where that fellow Anderson is. I don't have his method of contact either. Danitz might be aware of the situation in West Balham. Same for Mam Hermit. Likewise for Queen Mystic who's backing her. I'll first gather intelligence from these channels. Having made up his mind, Klein's working brain slowed down as a sense of drowsiness washed over him again. He let his body slide down bit by bit as he got under the blankets. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard, who had returned from Tingen, managed to be in time for the team's internal meeting. Soas first briefed them on the conclusion of the Archbishop and what the other local Nighthawk teams had obtained. With the help from the Holy Cathedral, St. Anthony has confirmed that the infiltrator is Gehrman Sparrow. The conclusion is that this crazy criminal is still alive but doesn't exist in this world. This is truly a contradictory statement. I don't understand it as well. His Grace didn't explain anything either. In short, our focus will be on the investigation of Gehrman Sparrow. According to the information provided by MI9, Gehrman Sparrow is a fake identity. He originally came from Backlund. After Soas finished the briefing, he asked, "Do you have anything to add?" Leonard opened his mouth and was just about to say something, but his eyes shimmered twice before he fell silent again. Soas turned his head and glanced at him, calling him out by name. "Leonard, did you discover any clues?" Leonard remained silent for a second before shrugging. "That clue has been eliminated." Soas didn't ask further as he looked at the other teammates. After a series of supplementary information and analysis, he began assigning missions to his Red Gloves team. After everything was assigned, Leonard Mitchell held a name list that required him to enter their dreams for a cross-check. He returned to the break room above and threw his body into bed. He sat there silently as he raised his hand to comb his hair, preparing to begin taking action. However, the first dream he entered wasn't anyone in the name list. His target was Duane Dantes. After repeated considerations, he decided to speak to this secret organization member, an undying monster from the fourth epoch, face to face. He wanted to see what information he could sound out. This looked somewhat rash, but with both parties knowing each other's secrets, it was still a good choice. 160 Buckland Street. Klein's drowsy mind suddenly became clear as he knew that someone had entered his dream. He pondered silently, sitting in a reclining chair and turning his head to look at the balcony. He saw a black-haired, green-eyed man wearing a white shirt and black vest nimbly leap inside. He was none other than Leonard Mitchell. "I haven't gone looking for you. And here you are coming to my doorstep." The other Nighthawks would politely knock on the door before entering. "Only you would jump into balconies," Klein lampooned as he looked at the poet approach him. At this moment, in Leonard's eyes, Dwayne Dantes was still wearing a formal suit in the dream. His sideburns were gray, and he had an angular face with an immense amount of charm. At this moment, the tycoon wore a smile, as though he wasn't hiding the fact that he remained lucid, and that he wasn't affected by a nightmare. "Didn't Pallas Zoros teach you some manners?" Klein said with a tone he believed matched Leonard's impression of him. "Pallas Zoros? He's warning me again." Leonard was taken aback as he remembered the name. He quickly reined in his thoughts and bowed in a manner that lacked standards. "Please pardon me for the intrusion. You are on our investigation list. Was the infiltration done by you guys? Is that your goal for coming to Backland?" "No." Klein and his Dwayne Dantes guys raised the cup of red wine and sipped it. "It's not us but just him alone." He put on an act that he wasn't afraid of Leonard knowing. "Gehrman Sparrow?" Leonard asked in a deep tone. Klein glanced at him with his deep blue eyes that seemed to have seen the vicissitudes of life. "Isn't that obvious? What does he actually want to do?" "He didn't take anything away," Leonard took the opportunity to ask. Klein raised his hand to stroke his white sideburns and chuckled. "What do you think is the answer?" Chapter 853. Comparison of experience in sophistry. What do I think? If I were to know the answer, why would I be here? I'd have long handed this information to my superiors. Leonard silently mumbled as he deliberated over his words. During this process, he discovered that, although he was standing straight and looking down on Dwayne Dantes, the tycoon who was sitting leisurely in the reclining chair held the aura of having the advantage. It was like a high-ranking personage casually listening to his subordinates' reports. This made Leonard feel a little uneasy. He subconsciously surveyed the area and pulled a chair over as he leaned back into it, half out of habit and half as a deliberate action. "I believe he, or all of you, are searching for something. Back in Tingen, he infiltrated the Nighthawks to search for something. In Backland, he also infiltrated Cheney's Gate to search for that item. His search was fruitless the first time, so he escaped by feigning death by using Ensanguil's assault. He still failed to find it the second time. Hence, he didn't take anything and directly left Cheney's Gate." While speaking, Leonard used a very certain tone to divulge that he had figured out that Gehrman Sparrow was Sherlock Moriarty, and also Klein Moretti. He wished to use the effect of pressure to make Dwayne Dantes not appear that calm, or have any thoughts of resorting to sophistry. "Indeed, he went to dig my grave." Klein sighed inwardly as he chuckled. He picked up the glass of red wine and gently swirled it. "Do you think that we would consecutively make 2 rash attempts before having any confirmed intelligence? You should know that such matters can only be done once. Once there's a failure, there's no way it can succeed again. Therefore, who would use an operation to verify one's guess when the target isn't clear?" He has tacitly confirmed my explanation. Klein Moretti is Gehrman Sparrow, Hero Bandit Black Emperor, a member of the secret organization who believes in the Fool. Leonard tried hard not to frown as he crossed his right leg and said, "So, it's not that nothing was found, but that there was a failure due to other factors?" During these 2 attempts, Tingen City's St. Selena Cathedral and Backland's St. Samuel Cathedral only shared 2 common items: sealed artifact 2-049, and the Antigonus family's notebook. Antigonus family's notebook. That's it. Klein Moretti joined the Nighthawks because of it. Although the process of inference is wrong, the answer is actually correct. Klein chuckled and said, "Our brains aren't there just for show." If his goal was the Antigonus family's notebook, there was no need for him to join the Nighthawks. Before you obtained it, he had plenty of opportunities. And even after you obtained it, he had no lack of opportunities to obtain it. You should understand the situation back then better than I do. Also, since the target was the Antigonus family's notebook, why didn't he take it away? Upon being mocked by Dwayne Dantes, Leonard Mitchell realized that the theory he came up with on the spot was filled with logical contradictions. He felt ashamed as he showed some anger. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "Then why would he infiltrate Cheney's gate using two different methods?" And not only didn't he take something away, but he didn't even leave anything behind. He even entered a strange state. Just as Leonard said that, he saw Dwayne Dantes with his gray sideburns produce a deep, profound smile. I'm not sure of the reason for the latter matters. Perhaps you should ask the Evernight goddess. Goddess? What does he mean? Leonard instantly felt alarmed and puzzled. He found it unimaginable as to what had happened behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's gate. Right on the heels of that, he heard Dwayne Dantes say with a deep laugh, "As for your first question, I believe you are mistaken about something. Our organization's members come from different places and join for different reasons, choosing to change their own faith in the process. As for what happened before that, their lives remain their own. Just like me. I had a past and have a present as well. The reason why I came here is because of the last name I gave myself. Dantes. The return of the Count. He joined the secret organization that worships the fool for revenge, and came to Backland?" Leonard nodded in thought. Klein paused for a few seconds as he casually sipped the red wine, and wore a smile. He continued, "Similarly, he, who was resurrected because of the Antigonus family's notebook's curse, does it for vengeance as well." Klein had deliberately mentioned his present last name, Dantes, and mentioned revenge. It was to preemptively distinguish himself from Gehrman Sparrow and Klein Moretti. It was to prevent Leonard from later finding similar objectives between the two and begin making a deeper connection from the similarities. By personally mentioning it, it framed the listener's thought processes and made them subconsciously follow the logic of the content, thus treating Dwayne Dantes and Klein Moretti as two completely different people. The only similarity was their thoughts of revenge. And in this world, there weren't only two Avengers. Leonard lowered his crossed right leg unknowingly as he leaned forward. Vengeance? Who does he wish to seek revenge on? After asking the question, the elegant and handsome middle-aged gentleman curled the corners of his lips. Lenivus and Insanguil. Insanguil, Leonard blurted out as he couldn't help but have his expression repeatedly change. Finally, he fell silent. His green eyes looked ahead unfocused, his thoughts a mystery. Phew. After a long silence, Leonard exhaled and released his originally clenched hands. He asked with his voice a little hoarse, "Lenivus was really killed by him?" Of course, Klein secretly sighed as he replied calmly. Leonard's mouth gaped open as though he wished to say something, but he didn't. He tightly pursed his lips. Realizing that his goals had been met, he immediately changed topics and chuckled. "If you have a similar goal or require help, you can also chant his honorific name. Perhaps you will receive a response." That secret existence, the fool? Leonard imagined that Dwayne Dantes was habitually proselytizing and attempting to develop the secret organization. Therefore, he didn't think further and replied with silence. Klein then laughed. "By the way, help me pass a message to Pallas Zoroast. One of our organization's members encountered Blasphemer Amon in the Forsaken Land of the Gods." This piece of information contained massive amounts of information. So much that Leonard was temporarily at a loss for a response. His mind kept reverberating with the relevant information. The Forsaken Land of the Gods? The Forsaken Land of the Gods that even the 7 churches are unable to find? Their secret organization actually has members who can enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Blasphemer Amon. Old man told me that he's hiding from a high-sequence beyonder with the last name Amon. He was heavily injured by Amon and had no choice but to parasitize me. Dwayne Dantes's tone and attitude really is like an undying monster who lived from the 4th epoch. He's also at the same or a similar level as Old Man. In front of him, I really don't feel any sense of superiority. I even feel like I'm lacking confidence. As his thoughts ran through his head, Leonard forced himself to focus. I'll pass on the message to him. Based on the circumstances after Leonard enters the dreams of others, it can be determined that the grandpa doesn't completely control his senses. Otherwise, he would definitely have an abnormal reaction when he hears the name blasphemer Amon. Previously, Will Septon's words also corroborates this point. Only when my dear poet encounters true danger would the grandpa sense it and take action. Very good. He isn't a full parasite. As Klein interpreted the unspoken information, he smiled. You may leave. You can also relax. My goal isn't the Church of Evernight. My coming goals, not the ones of the past. Klein silently added inwardly. Leonard had already received enough information. Thus, he didn't dare overstay his welcome. He got up and bowed. Then he left Dwayne Dantes' dream. In a room on the back streets of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard woke up and heard the aged voice from the parasite in him echo in his mind. What did he say? Leonard deliberated over his words and said, he directly admitted to being a member of that secret organization that believes in the fool. Likewise for Klein Moretti, whose alias is Gehrman Sparrow. Their goal is for vengeance, their own vengeance. Pallas Zoros fell silent for a second before saying, did he say how Klein Moretti could be resurrected? Or how did he fake his death to such an extent? Leonard recalled and said, the explanation he gave was a curse from the Antigonus family's notebook. Curse. At this point, Leonard discovered that Dwayne Dantes' choice of words was rather strange. He had described the power of resurrecting the dead as a curse. Pallas Zoros didn't seem to have any questions about that. After a few seconds of silence, he said, what else did he say? Leonard didn't hide it from him and said frankly, he mentioned blasphemer Amon, saying that a member of their organization met him in the forsaken land of the gods. Old man, is that the Amon you mentioned? The aged voice replied after a while, probably. He paused for a moment before saying, I believe that Dwayne Dantes no. The fool that's backing him might be some old friend of mine. Old man believes that he's at a higher level than Dwayne Dantes or even higher. He's a grounded angel? Leonard thought and asked, which old friend? Pallas Zoros didn't answer as he asked, are you going to find an opportunity to reveal the situation about Dwayne Dantes and Klein Moretti? Leonard suddenly fell silent and only heavily said more than 10 seconds later, not for now. Perhaps he and I, and them, have the chance of working together. And the church didn't suffer any material loss this time. The parasite inside him didn't say a word, as though he had fallen asleep. Leonard slowly looked up and read the information in front of him. His eyes turned dark as he muttered, he's overtaken me by leaps and bounds. Chapter 854. Confession. Early morning, 160 Buckland Street. After Klein got out of bed and washed up, he didn't rush to leave the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the gray fog. He then conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and made the fake person pray piously. Honorable Mr. Fool, please pass on the message to Danitz. I need him to provide me information on West Balam. It's best if he includes his social connections. Also, get him to be careful of the Church of Evernight for the time being. Above the Golden Dream, Danitz, who saw the sun earlier than Backlund, was holding a cup of malt beer as he sat in the shadows, hiding away from the vile sunlight. Lessons will begin in another 15 minutes. Captain said that a treasure hunter must have a sufficiently good grasp of mathematics. Sigh, this is really such a headache, but it's also something to look forward to. Dogs hit. Danitz placed one hand on his knee as he downed a mouthful of beer. At this moment, the gray fog emanated in front of him. The blurry figure that looked down from above appeared as Danitz's ears resounded with Gehrman Sparrow's voice. Information on West Balam? Although we've been there to search for lost ancient treasure, and got to know a few tribal natives, that is pretty much it. There won't be much that I can tell him about. This is so troublesome. I'll have to do all sorts of work again. Why does Gehrman Sparrow get involved in so many things? Danitz silently grumbled as he vigilantly glanced to his sides, afraid that the madman would suddenly appear. He drew a breath upon considering how he wanted to become stronger. He didn't wish to be of no help when his captain met with danger, having to shamefully hide at the back. Danitz slapped his face a few times with his free hand before standing up. He immediately left the shadows and found Iron Skin and Bucket. He asked them in detail about West Balam's situation and who he should ask for the various matters, only to obtain a unanimous answer. Captain Edwina Edwards, or Anderson Hood, who previously joined our bonfire on the ship. Will she be suspicious if I directly ask Captain, making her believe that I have a secret and am secretly working for someone else? But I've no idea where that fellow Anderson has gone to. Dogs hit. Danitz fell into a dilemma as he couldn't help but think about something else, recalling Gairman Sparrow's last words. Be careful of the Church of Evernight. Danitz wasn't a fool. He knew that a matter that the crazy adventurer emphasized was something important. It also meant that he believed that he had a high chance of being an important target of the Church of Evernight. He would be wildly pursued by the Red Gloves. Apart from the Church of Evernight, the Church of Storms, and the military are targeting me as well. It's said that they have each sent a squad. Danitz thought as his heart palpitated. He soon revealed a puzzled and bitter look as he muttered to himself, but I haven't done anything. After passing the message about gathering information on West Balam to Admiral of Stars Catlia, Klein left the area above the gray fog and returned to the real world. Like every other day, he had his breakfast and had lessons. After he woke up from his afternoon nap, with Richardson's help, he changed into a formal suit for an excursion. He got into the carriage that had already been waiting for him at the door. Head to St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he instructed the carriage driver. He had decided to continue maintaining his identity as Dwayne Dantes. He believed that it was best if he didn't change his former persona. Therefore, he couldn't change the frequency of his trips to St. Samuel Cathedral. Nor could he donate less. Besides, this can effectively wipe away any suspicion they have of me. After all, it's hard to imagine that the criminal who infiltrated Cheney's Gate hadn't stayed behind, but would saunter into the cathedral as though nothing had happened. I'll have to thank Emperor Roselle for not plagiarizing criminal psychology. He didn't point out that intelligent criminals often return to their crime scene to admire their work and the helpless response of others. Klein mumbled inwardly as he took a sip of the black tea that Richardson had brewed. After moistening his throat, he glanced at his valet and asked, seemingly casually, "What is your deepest impression of East and West Balam?" Sitting beside him, Richardson didn't ask why. After some thought he said, "East Balam is safer. West Balam is more chaotic." After giving a simple answer, Richardson turned to look at his employer, only to see Dwayne Dantes with his eyes half closed as though he wanted him to continue. Richardson scratched his ear and deliberated over his words. There's also poverty, hunger, and whip abuse. People from East and West Balam originally worshipped death. Later, due to the perks of believing in the deities like the goddess, Lord of Storms, and the eternal blazing sun, allowing them to boost their statuses and receive protection from the cathedral, there was a large-scale change of faith. However, as the number of believers increased, that special status was quickly removed. The people of the lower class began worshipping death again in secret. It's more obvious for the more messy West Balam in regards to this point. The descendants of death often receive a great deal of support. This is what my father of mine occasionally mentions after he's drunk. Klein listened in silence and didn't stop his valet's recount, nor did he probe deeper. Soon, the carriage arrived outside St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein first took in the sight of the white flying pigeons before entering the prayer hall. He took off his hat and handed it together with his cane to Richardson. He randomly found a seat and looked at the altar in the darkness. He watched the stars and the dark sacred emblem as unease, embarrassment, and a lack of confidence arose in him. If he had guessed correctly, ever since he made contact with the holy sword and made a vow, the goddess had likely taken notice of him. Every time he entered the cathedral to pretend like he was praying, it had the feeling like the emperor's new clothes. I wonder what the goddess's opinion on this is. And what position is the church taking? I'll probe first. Klein clasped his hands and held it to his nose, looking as though he was praying seriously. After about 8 minutes, he slowly got up, walked to the donation box, took out £50, and piously threw it in. After doing that, Klein turned to the confessional along the sides of the hall and entered. Unlike most ancient confessionals, which were big wooden crates with 2 doors, The modern confessional was an independent, spacious compartment. The confessor and the listening bishop were separated by a wooden partition, with each one of them having their seats. Using the dim light, Klein sat on the chair and listened to the bishop say with his mellow voice, "Do you have something you would like to say? The goddess cares about all her believers." Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. "Praise the Lady. I wish to confess that 2 days ago, the military came to me, wishing that I can sell a batch of firearms and cannons to West Balam, to add coal to the chaos there." After he said that, the bishop on the other side didn't immediately give him an answer, as though he was alarmed by the arms dealing. He was momentarily unsure as to how to organize his words. The confessional instantly ended up being wrapped in an awkward silence. "You became frightened just from that? Have you never encountered a confessor as frank as me? If I were to say that I'm currently plotting the murder of a demigod while hiding from the mother tree of desire and the true creator, wouldn't you be jumping up?" Klein lampooned as he continued. "I did enjoy the adventurer's life when I was young. I obtained my wealth through metal, blood and fire. But I'm already sick of that life. I only wish for a peaceful future. I originally wanted to decline the offer, but I'm unable to overcome the greed in my heart. This is a sufficiently enticing business, and it helps me in obtaining a firm footing in Baklan's high society. I confess that I ultimately chose the bustle and chaos." The bishop on the other side finally had a response as he said with a gentle voice, "Don't be afraid. Don't waver. You don't have to feel guilt for a certain level of greed. As long as you don't harm the innocent or commit any of the crimes as written in the Bible, go follow your inner heart and make the choice you wish to make the most. Only this way can you truly understand the teachings and understand the truth of those words. There's no need to be put in a difficult position. Remember this. No matter what you do, sincerely being contrite and penitent is worthy of praise and forgiveness. May the goddess bless you. Praise the Lady." Klein drew the crimson moon once again on his chest. His visit to St. Samuel Cathedral was to use the opportunity of a confession to inform the church of his intentions of engaging in arms dealing. He wanted to know their reaction, so as to pry into the goddess's attitude towards him. Without saying anything extra, Klein slowly got up and left the confessional. He walked down the aisle and went towards his valet Richardson. At this moment, he saw a lady sitting in the corner of the prayer hall. She was wearing a hooded black robe, with blue eyeshadow and blush. She had quite an uncanny sense of beauty. She was none other than spirit medium Daly Simone. Daly looked up and similarly noticed Dwayne Dantes. Her expression momentarily turned adrift as though she had fallen asleep while praying and had entered a dream. Klein nodded at her indiscernibly as a polite gesture. Then, he took his hat and cane from Richardson as he unhurriedly walked out of the hall. Daly retracted her gaze as she looked down at the pew in front of her before slowly closing her eyes. Walking out St. Samuel Cathedral, Klein stood by the side of the staircase and paused for 2 seconds. The white pigeons suddenly flew up in the square up ahead, blocking the sights of all who were taking in the scene. Less than 30 minutes later in the basement, Leonard heard that Dwayne Dantes, who had previously been investigated, was about to cooperate with the officials. He was going to be a merchant who would sell arms to West Balam. What is he trying to do? Leonard frowned little by little, completely at a loss as to what the undying monster's thoughts were. Chapter 855. New visitor. As he returned from St. Samuel Cathedral to 160 Buckland Street, Klein saw his white-gloved butler, Walter, walk up to him. "Sir, someone delivered a name card. He said that his employer wishes to visit you from 4 to 5, Walter said with a staid expression. Klein tried figuring out who the visitor was, but he had no clue. He nodded gently and said, "Who's his employer?" Walter darted his gaze around, and saw that the other servants were rather far away. He then replied, "Baron Sindras." Baron Sindras. That millionaire tycoon who obtained his aristocratic title with the help of the Conservative Party and Duke Negan, and is also one of the most famous bankers and entrepreneurs in the kingdom? I previously helped Ma'am Mary purchase the Coin Company shares. The competitor happens to be him and his friends. He's visiting me personally for that matter. It's only a transaction worth about £13,000. It shouldn't be something that requires him to go this far. As Klein's mind raced, he walked to the staircase that led to the second floor. Walter walked half a step behind him as he said, "Sir, if you don't wish to meet Baron Sindras, I'll inform him that you got caught up at St. Samuel Cathedral, listening to the bishop's preachings, and might return very late." In between the lines, the butler was saying that Baron Sindras was a believer of the Lord of Storms. It was impossible for him to head directly to St. Samuel Cathedral to seek him out. Klein thought and smiled before gently saying, "This is a noble who has immense influence in the banking industry. I'll definitely come across him in the future, so I have to meet him. Arrange the meeting to be at the small living room on the second floor where there's the most sunlight." According to what Klein knew, Baron Sindras was the third largest shareholder of Backlund Bank and the largest shareholder of Southville People's Bank. In Lone Kingdom's banking industry, he was definitely one of the few people with the greatest influence. "Yes, sir." Walter didn't nag on. At 4:10, Klein met the visitor who often appeared on the papers, in the predetermined living room. The only thing that was different and deviated from his expectations was that Backlund turned cloudy after 3. The weather had turned dark and began drizzling. It didn't bring in the bright and warm sunshine. Baron Sindras was identical to how he looked on the papers. He had black hair mixed with some white hair that was neatly combed backward, revealing his broad forehead and receding hairline. His face was rather round, but it lacked the flesh needed to support it. His cheekbones were rather high, and his wrinkles were obvious. Unlike most Loanese his age, Baron Sindras didn't have any facial hair. He was clean-shaven, and his light blue eyes were nearly colorless. Beside him were a valet and bodyguard. They were the kind of people that didn't attract much attention. The former's greatest characteristic was his thin hair, while the latter had short hair if you didn't count the thick beard that reached down from his ears. "Good afternoon, Lord Sindras. It's my honor to have you here as my guest." Klein held his hand to his chest as he bowed. Usually, a host would mostly lean their bodies forward and reach out their right hand for a handshake when greeting a guest, but at this moment, he was in front of a noble, thus requiring him to be more courteous. Baron Sindras nodded gently as he smiled in response. "You're being polite. I should have visited you a long time ago, Dwayne Dantes, an experienced gentleman who knows much about the southern continent." After exchanging some pleasantries, the two took their seats while the valets and bodyguards settled by the side. Klein was just about to say something when Baron Sindras said with a genial tone, "Dantes, I'm really impressed with people like you. Not everyone can obtain riches from the chaos in the southern continent. This requires plenty of guts and the courage to face adversity, as well as stunning judgment. Back when I was facing bankruptcy, I had entertained the idea of starting anew in the southern continent, but unfortunately, I'm not a brave man." Although Baron Sindras later became a noble, he wasn't a commoner in the true sense of the word. His great-grandfather and grandfather had benefited from the development of the colonies, earning them plenty of money from the sea trade. They were rather successful merchants. As for his father, he had invested in industries, building up his reputation and acquiring several factories. When it came to his generation, he blitzed into the developing banking industry with his sizable wealth, becoming one of the earliest millionaires in Lone. During this process, Baron Sindras had suffered 3 failures, but he overcame them one after another. The most harrowing incident was when the Southville People's Bank he founded suffered from a reputation crisis. A bank run happened, nearly bankrupting him. He keeps chatting about my experiences in the southern continent. Is he hinting to me that he has already discovered the problems with my background and is using it as a warning? He probably never expected that the southern continent experience he keeps repeating is all fake. Klein scoffed inwardly, but he replied while looking absolutely normal. "That isn't courage but rashness. Most people who head to the southern continent do have the spirit of adventure, but that's all they have." Without waiting for Baron Sindras to continue, he smiled and said, "I nearly hired Mr. Reback some time ago as my butler. He said that you were an excellent employer." Baron Sindras listened in silence before sighing. "That is something that fills me with regret. Back then, I was very sincere in hoping that Reback could continue being my butler, but he couldn't overcome the conflict within our positions. Upon saying that, Syndra's looked at the handsome and elegant Dwayne Dantes, picked up the black tea that had been served by a servant, and took a sip. I also sincerely hope that we can be friends. I hope you can transfer the Coim Company's 3% to me. I will give you an offer you can't resist. Here it comes. But I have a contract with Ma'am Mary. Klein fell silent for 2 seconds and said with a smiling sigh, I deeply value my trustworthiness. Upon hearing such an answer, Syndra's didn't show any obvious anger. He smiled, curious and surprised. Aren't you going to listen to my offer? Klein deliberately spread out his hands with a wry smile. I'm afraid I will find it irresistible. Haha. Syndra's immediately laughed and slowly stood up. You're as humorous as they say. At the same time, you have a firm will that the rumors fail to mention. He looked at his bodyguard and valet before saying to Dwayne Dantes with a smile, being a partner with you is definitely better than being a competitor. All right, it's time that I leave. There are many things that require my attention. Is this sincere praise or a veiled threat? Klein wasn't a spectator, so he wasn't able to interpret the subtleties. All he could do was shamelessly reply, likewise. I look forward to having the opportunity to cooperate with you in other domains, Lord Syndra's. Dressed in a formal suit and a tie, Baron Syndra's smiled and nodded. Without saying another word, he was led out of the main door by Dwayne Dantes and his butler and valet. As he watched the luxurious carriage disappear into the distance, Butler Walter suddenly said, Sir, should I hire some temporary bodyguards? Ah. Klein nearly failed to understand his butler. Seeing his employer's expression remain unperturbed, Walter added, At times competition in business can endanger one's personal safety. Mr. Butler also noticed the veiled threats by Baron Syndra's. Klein curled the corners of his lips and said, I'm not too worried because this is Backlund. Because my name is known at the Church of Evernight. Because I'm about to cooperate with the military. Therefore, I'm not afraid of suffering any form of retaliation in the Beyonder domain. And I'm not afraid that matters will develop like with the Intis ambassador. Besides, Baron Syndra's is a successful man with status and power. He won't be that rash. Klein thought inwardly. When Walter attempted to continue, Klein chuckled and said, However, being careful is forever a good habit. You can hire 2 bodyguards. Let them secretly provide me with protection. Try to not have them be discovered by the servants at home. Yes, sir, Walter immediately replied. Klein thought for a moment and said, Make a trip to Member of Parliament Mock's place. Invite him to dinner at the Intis Srenzo restaurant tomorrow along with his wife and daughter. If they have a prior commitment, we can postpone it to another day. He planned on informing Mock that he planned on taking the military's test and completing the small arms deal. The most convenient method was to visit Mock at his residence and mention it in passing, but considering how there might be a demigod of the marauder pathway around Hazel, any close contact might result in the aura of the gray fog on him being detected. Therefore, Klein changed his plans and decided to have the venue to be at a restaurant. This way, based on his judgment, the demigod which had failed to parasitize Hazel was unlikely to accompany her. Zio hid in the shadows of the woods as she watched a brown carriage slowly drive past and turn into a particular street in Empress Borough. There was an obvious coat of arms on the carriage. It was mainly a flower and 2 rings. They belonged to the captain of the Lone Kingdom's Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford. Realizing that she had made 0 discoveries, she gloomily left her hiding spot and took a nearby public carriage. She returned straight to the Backlund Bridge area and walked into East Borough. Upon coming to the Dharavi Streets bar, Zio easily walked to the bar counter as the drunkards avoided her. She directly asked the bartender who was wiping a cup, Any new jobs? The bartender immediately smiled. Yes. Butler Walter, who previously offered a £200 bounty for a few cheats, has offered a new job. It's very simple. Secretly protect his employer for a few days. The payment will be discussed face to face. It will definitely be a handsome reward. He was very pleased with your efficiency during the last mission. He requested that we give you priority. How about it? Are you interested? Zio had a rather deep impression of the butler and his employer, because they had spent £200 to seek out cheats who had only scammed £1,000 of cloth. Very generous, And he's quick to pay. Zio did a slight recall before nodding and saying, "All right." Chapter 856. Bodyguards arrive in an apartment in Sherwood Borough. Just as Zio entered, she caught the scent of fried food. She couldn't help but twitch her nose and look towards the kitchen. Furs. Would there be anyone else? Furs peeked her head out from the kitchen and asked with a smile. Zio put down the papers in her hand, half surprised and half grumbling. "Do you still remember how long it's been since you stepped into a kitchen? Making toast in the morning doesn't count." Furs returned to the kitchen, leaving only her voice behind. "I choose the food outside because they're better. And now, the surrounding streets don't have any good fried chicken. I suddenly had cravings for it. When it comes to Intis cuisine, I like it the most." Zio walked to the kitchen and leaned against the door frame as she watched Furs busily prepare dinner. She deliberated and said, "I received a job. £100 a day. Ranging from 3 to 5 days, but I need another helper. Weren't you previously lacking in money? Why don't we do it together? Actually, my financial situation has improved. However, a mission that pays £50 a day isn't bad. I'll save up as much as I can. There will be plenty of places that require me to spend money in the future." As Furs watched her oil-filled pot, she asked, "What kind of job is it?" She had already calculated how much she could receive. Zio combed her slightly coarse blonde hair and said, "Secretly protect a tycoon named Dwayne Dantes." "What did he encounter? Will it be very dangerous?" Furs asked cautiously. Zio recalled and said, "Apparently there was some kind of business conflict, and his competitor has threatened him. This isn't anything dangerous. As you are aware, the powerful Beyonders in Backland wouldn't dare to take any risks, as it's easy to expose themselves, causing them to be targeted by the Nighthawks and mandated punishers. Perhaps the other party is a lunatic? You can't rule that out." While retorting, Furs naturally thought of the world Gehrman Sparrow. This gentleman was a lunatic who dared to pull off major upsets in Backland. She paused and scooped up the pieces of fried chicken. "Since you've already accepted the mission and I have nothing coming up recently, let's do it together. It's good too. We will be protecting him in secret, so no one will discover that I'm a bodyguard. Otherwise, I'll have no way of participating in those literature saloons. Haha, actually, I can tell them that I'm experiencing life and gathering material. My next novel will be about a female bodyguard and her male employer." Zio was already used to Furs's penchant for letting her thoughts wander. She scrunched up her nose and said, "Let's head over after dinner." 160 Buckland Street. Klein had set up a ritual in the master bedroom's bathroom and headed above the gray fog. He planned on handling some random matters before the bodyguards hired by butler Walter came. It wouldn't be convenient for him to do them in the coming days. And among these random matters, the most important task was to confirm the situation with the creeping hunger. Sitting behind the seat belonging to the fool, Klein made the human-skinned glove fly out from the junk pile. After a series of divinations, he discovered that the creeping hunger was rather stubborn this time. None of the negative side effects had changed. It's a result of Mr. A's corruption, so it's absolutely not giving up its praise of the true creator? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he seriously considered the solution to this matter. Find another way to threaten it? No, how can I call it threatening? Under the premise of being proactive, I will be engaging in friendly communication with it. Klein wrapped the corner of the long mottled table and muttered silently, "I'll be writing to Mr. Azek later anyway. I can also mention in passing that the creeping hunger's seal is no longer effective. I can also bring some mushrooms along with me." No, that wouldn't work. Although it will stop the creeping hunger from praising the true creator, it will make it unusable. I'll get a few of the original mutated mushrooms from Frank to see if there are other effects. After determining his thought process, Klein threw Azek's copper whistle and the adventurer's harmonica through the door of sacrifice and bestowment before returning to the real world. He packed up the ritual items and wiped away any traces of the ritual. After leaving the bathroom, Klein walked to his study desk, taking out a fountain pen and paper as he deliberated over the things to say. "Dear Mr. Azek, it's been a while since I've written to you. I wonder how you've been recently. Due to certain unforeseen circumstances, your seal on the creeping hunger is no longer effective. Can you give me the corresponding method? I wish to apply the seal on it again. Have you heard of creatures known as spirit world plunderers? What level are they, and what kinds of characteristics do they have? Where are they usually active in? I might be heading to the southern continent in the near future. If I obtain any new information on death, I'll write to you as soon as possible. Putting down the fountain pen and reading it twice, Klein folded the letter and blew the copper whistle. Silently, white bones spewed out from the floor, gushing out like a fountain into midair, forming a giant skeleton that was nearly 4 meters tall. The skeleton lowered its head to glance at Dwayne Dantes before bending its back, bending its right arm and spreading open its palm. This messenger is becoming more polite. Klein nodded in satisfaction, handing it the letter. The skeleton messenger didn't stay, and it immediately disintegrated, pouring down like a waterfall before rapidly vanishing. Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief as he retracted his gaze and continued writing a letter to Frank. The dried mushrooms you provided were pretty good. Do you still have more? Do you find the idea I previously mentioned viable? If you encounter any difficulties during the research process, you can write to me. After folding the letter, Klein blew into the adventurer's harmonica. He saw Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker appear by his side. She still lacked a head as she wore a complicated black dress while holding 4 beautiful blonde, red-eyed heads. Can you lock onto Frank Lee? Klein asked rather confidently. After all, Miss Messenger was unlike ordinary messengers. She was a spirit world creature at the demigod level. Under normal circumstances, a messenger could only locate the contractor or the person who held the summoning ritual. As for the latter, there was a limitation. Once the ritual was too far away, the messenger wouldn't be able to find them. Rionette Tinker's 4 heads turned in unison and looked at Klein. Yes, it's that man who wants to plant everything, right? What did Frank do to leave such a deep impression on Miss Messenger? Back when I replied, she even said that she hoped that he wasn't dead. Klein nodded seriously. Yes. Rionette Tinker's 4 heads spoke one after another. Can locate. I labeled him. Ah? Klein turned agape, nearly forgetting his motives. Poor Frank. No, the great and powerful Frank. He actually got Miss Messenger to specially label him. May the goddess watch over him. Klein silently exhaled and handed the letter to Rionette Tinker. Please hand it to Frank. He will pay you the gold coin. One of the heads in Rionette Tinker's hand opened its mouth and bit down on the letter. Then, it directly entered the spirit world, unable to be sensed again. After dealing with these matters, Klein left the copper whistle and harmonica on him. He went downstairs to have dinner. Midway, Walter entered and whispered into Dwayne Dantes's ear. The bodyguards have arrived. It's that Miss Zio and her friend from before. I will arrange for them to secretly provide you protection. Miss Zio and her friend? Don't tell me it's Miss Magician. Klein was momentarily at a loss for words, as all he could do was gently nod, acknowledging the new tidbit of information. His spirituality actually didn't sense that someone had infiltrated his house. However, this was very normal since it wasn't time for most people to sleep for the night. When it was that period of time, any abnormalities became rather obvious. Therefore, unless Klein specially used his spirituality to leave undetectable marks at key spots, or if the intruder had plenty of ill intentions towards him, he would find it difficult to notice them. In a bedroom on the 3rd floor, Zio and Furs each took a window. Through the glass, they looked down at the garden. This is my dream house. When I have enough money, I'll buy a house just like this in a scenic area. No, I'll still choose Backlund. There are more delicacies here, and it's more convenient, Furs said sincerely. With that said, she sighed inwardly. Unfortunately, I have the curse of the full moon. I can only continue improving myself. Otherwise, I'd have kept a house instead of selling it for cash. Zio traced her friend's gaze and looked outside, whispering, I lived in such a residence when I was little. Furs stole a glance at Zio. As she had no idea what to say, she changed topics. How should we provide him with protection? Zio retracted her gaze. When Mr. Dwayne Dantes is home and without guests, We'll just hide in the room and watch the surroundings to prevent anyone from infiltrating. When there are guests, we'll head to the adjacent room and keep close attention to any developments. We'll open the door at any moment to save him. If Mr. Duane Dantes were to head out, the butler will inform us ahead of time. I'll hide underneath the carriage to protect him while you'll follow on another carriage. Zio, you're becoming more and more professional. Furs seriously praised her before chuckling. I saw Mr. Duane Dantes's portrait just now. If you hadn't told me that the danger arose because of a business conflict, I would have suspected that the problem arose because of love. Before Furs finished her sentence, she suddenly saw a carriage stop outside the compound. Following that, a few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms got out of the carriage. What's happening? She looked at her friend, and found Zio looking equally puzzled. Inside the living room on the second floor, Klein met the 4 officers. Mr. Duane Dantes, do you know Mr. Quarren? Quarren? Klein tried recalling and remembered that it was the gentleman who had sold him the Coim Company shares. Yes, what happened to him? Klein asked calmly. The officer that led the team replied in a rather polite manner. He committed suicide. In addition, he left behind a will, accusing you of forcing him to sell his shares and torturing him using all kinds of underhanded means, causing him to suffer from severe depression. And his family has provided proof regarding the contents of his will. Chapter 857. Poignant. Quarren committed suicide? His will accused me of forcing him to sell his shares? His family can even provide evidence? As Klein listened to the officer's description, he digested the relevant information and produced questions in his mind. After he understood the situation, his first reaction was, Baron Sindras has taken action. This powerful banker didn't hesitate to carry out his follow-up action against me after failing to cooperate with me, treating me as an enemy. He didn't hold back. Furthermore, he has clearly gathered enough information to know that Duane Dantes is involved with the Church of Evernight and Member of Parliament Mocked and the faction backing him. If he were to directly deal with me, it would easily attract unwanted trouble. Therefore, he chose to strike at the other end of the transaction, Quarren. This will be more indirect and safer, but it would be equally treacherous and ruthless. This is an utter disregard of an ordinary person's life. Klein suddenly recalled the innocent people who collapsed during the Great Smog of Backlund. He couldn't help but feel a sense of rage surge within him as it bubbled to the surface but was ice-cold. Klein used his clown powers to control his facial expression, making him look even more surprised as he asked, seemingly finding the situation incomprehensible. Are you certain you aren't joking? The leading officer nodded solemnly. If we didn't have sufficient clues to support it, we wouldn't disturb a gentleman like you. Mr. Duane Dantes, I'll have to trouble you to follow us to the station for further investigations. Despite looking unperturbed, Klein's mind was racing. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly noticed something illogical. Regardless, murder is a serious crime in the current Lone Kingdom. With Baron Sindras's identity, status and social connections, he will have at least a few dozen effective means to deal with a foreign tycoon that just came to Backlund 2 months ago. There's no need to go this far. After all, as a member of high society, he will more or less understand or be in contact with beyonder powers. He knows that there are all kinds of incredible means to pursue the true murderer. Unless he's completely confident, taking the risk to frame someone for murder is definitely the worst choice. If Sindras were to use his authority to suppress the investigations of the official beyonders, it will definitely be more effective and simpler to employ other means. Even if he temporarily isn't aware that I'm about to work with the military, he's definitely aware of my connection with the Church of Evernight and Member of Parliament Mocked. He wouldn't do things in such a simple and brazen manner. Most importantly, even if he's the kind of murderer who would kill for 3% shares, why didn't he do it earlier? He could have held Quarren at gunpoint early on, resolving the matter without causing any fuss. Klein glanced at the officers in front of him while in thought without immediately giving an answer. And in an adjacent room, Zio and Furs were leaning against the wall. Using the latter's ability to open a small door, they didn't miss any parts of the entire conversation. What do we do? If the police want to arrest him, do we still provide protection? Furs, who lacked the experience of a bounty hunter, hurriedly suppressed her voice as she asked her friend. She never expected that the business conflict would result in a case of murder and suspicion of framing. The enemy she had imagined had transformed from an infiltrating murderous bandit into a police officer. She was momentarily unsure of what to do. Zaya was also in a dilemma. Usually, a bodyguard will only deal with illegal encroachers. But they have given a sufficiently sizable remuneration. Furs was surprised and amused by the response as she asked, "If he really is imprisoned, are you thinking of breaking him out of jail? Let's put aside the problem of danger. That way, you too would be wanted, and you won't be able to be a bounty hunter again. When the time comes, do you plan on fleeing elsewhere with this gentleman?" As she spoke, Furs, who had already come up with a story, discovered that Dwayne Dantes had a response. This elegant gentleman with white sideburns turned to look at Walter, and said with a calm and gentle voice, "Two matters. First, visit Baron Sindras and tell him that someone is trying to frame him." Walter revealed a rare look of surprise and confusion, finding his employer's instructions incomprehensible. From his point of view, this matter was highly likely to be machinated by Baron Sindras. It was pointless visiting him, as it would only result in mockery. Klein smiled. He was a guest recently, and he had threatened me for the shares. Following that, Mr. Quarren met with his demise. I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't be under suspicion. Therefore, I believe that it's necessary to warn him. This is what a gentleman should do. The officers were slightly perturbed by what was said. They had the inexplicable feeling that the matter was more complicated than they had imagined. As for Walter, he was somewhat enlightened as he replied, "Yes, sir. I'll immediately visit Baron Sindras, and inform your friends and his of this matter. This way, if this wasn't done by Baron Sindras, all subsequent trouble would be dealt with by him. If he were the mastermind behind this, by involving him in the name of kindly warning him and spreading the news, it could create sufficient pressure from public opinion. It would make it easier for Member of Parliament Mocked and company to rescue him. Smart. A good butler really helps." Klein silently praised him as he continued, "Second, please call for my lawyer to handle this tiny inconvenience." After instructing his butler and valet, Klein looked at the few officers in front of him. "All right, I'll follow you back to the station. I won't make things difficult for you. However, I wouldn't answer any of your questions before my lawyer arrives." The leading officer heaved a sigh of relief as he said with a nod, "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Dantes." At this moment, in the adjacent room, Furs hurriedly said, "Are we following?" "Yes. I'll hide underneath the carriage now and follow it to the station. We can't be certain that those police officers are real ones." Zio replied rather cautiously. She paused, seizing the moment to ask, "What else do you wish to say?" Furs thought for a moment and poignantly said, "Nobles and tycoons are truly terrifying." Zio was taken aback. She didn't speak further as she walked to the window. Supporting herself with one hand, she nimbly jumped down, landing in the shadows of the building. A few minutes later, Klein and two officers boarded a carriage belonging to Dwayne Dantes. When he sat down, he looked at the thick carpet, his expression the same as before. At the police station, Klein was directly brought to an interrogation room. However, he didn't give a response, regardless of what the officer asked. Only when his lawyer arrived did he give an account. He said that he had only met Quarren once. He also mentioned that the negotiation of the share purchase was completely handled by a professional team. Hence, he didn't personally involve himself in it. He repeated his statements, saying that he was unaware of anything else. This left the interrogator at a loss until he was called out of the room. After a while, the officer responsible for recording the statement walked in and said, "All right, you may leave. A gentleman with an honorable status has vouched for you and paid for your bail." Klein didn't immediately stand up as he continued sitting in the chair. He looked up and asked, "Who is it?" The officer said with a respectful tone, "Baron Sindras." Klein immediately revealed a smile as he slowly got up. He left the interrogation room with his lawyer before meeting up with his butler and valet. At the entrance to the police station, he met Baron Sindras once again. This powerful banker's hair was still neatly combed back, with silver and black interweaving with each other. Beside him was a valet and his bearded bodyguard. "Thank you for your warning, Dantes. Few people would be so calm and sharp when they encounter such a sudden turn of events." Sindras smiled as he took 2 steps forward, reached out his palm, and shook Klein's hand. Klein replied with a smile. "I was simply trusting your character." Sindras obviously didn't believe such lip service. He found an excuse and with his bodyguard, boarded Dwayne Dantes's carriage. As for his valet, he sent him off to his luxurious carriage to instruct the carriage driver to follow behind. As parasol trees flew past outside the carriage window, Sindras spoke first. "Dantes, how did you come to such a judgment?" Klein glanced at his butler and valet beside him and chuckled. 2 points. First, I believe that you will have a better solution. You wouldn't do something this violent. Sindras drank a mouthful of white wine on the carriage as he chuckled. Indeed. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he said, "I'm very curious as to what kind of methods you would employ." He had only asked in passing, without the extravagant hopes of obtaining an answer. However, Sindras chuckled and said, "With matters developing this far, it doesn't matter if I tell you. It's very simple. Isn't your goal to enter high society? I plan to hire women of different ages. They will accuse you on different social occasions that you toyed with their feelings and bodies, but you refuse to be responsible for your actions. If necessary, I'll find a few toddling children to clasp you around the legs, calling you PA. Perhaps I might get some civilians to accuse you of seducing their wives and destroying their marriage. This is Lone, a rather conservative place. No one would wish to have such a person as a friend. Likewise, the Church of Evernight, who values marriage and family, will also distance itself from you. It will be difficult to clear the air on such matters. Yet, it wouldn't be a big deal. They wouldn't use their resources to help do an investigation for you. By the time you eventually find a loophole, your image would be hardened and known by all. How many people do you think will believe your explanations? You are just a newcomer and have yet to build a reputation. You aren't that trustworthy. Of course, if you were willing to accept my conditions, I'd stake my reputation for you. That will be the first step. Now it wouldn't happen." Klein was almost stunned by what he heard. He found himself too inexperienced compared to a seasoned banker who had established a commercial empire for himself. "I believe I should thank you," he replied with an unfazed smile. "Second, if you really wanted the 3% shares, I wouldn't be your match when it comes to wealth. It would ultimately be better to force Mr. Quarren rather than killing him after the sale is completed." Sindras raised his right hand and pressed his fingers to the corner of his forehead as he chuckled. "No, you're mistaken. I was bent on obtaining the 3% share. However, you're right about one thing. I did prepare an irresistible offer for Quarren, but he suddenly made a decision and completed the deal with you at an extremely fast speed. It caught me by surprise." Klein narrowed his eyes slightly as he suddenly fell silent. Returning to 160 Buckland Street, Zio circled the area and entered the 3rd floor again, seeing Furs, who had easily entered by using door opening. "How is it? Nothing happened, right?" Furs, who had only followed from a distance away, asked curiously. Zio shook her head in a slightly wooden manner. "No." She then revealed a poignant expression. "Nobles and tycoons are truly terrifying." Chapter 858. Generous. On the tiny balcony of the master bedroom, Klein stood behind a railing in the form of Dwayne Dantes. He silently watched Baron Sindras's luxurious carriage depart. His mind was still resonating with the conversation he just had. He believed that there had been a secret plot behind the acquiring of the Coim Company's shares from the very beginning. According to Sindras, although the Coim Company has great potential and bright prospects, its current value is only limited to Backlund. It's constrained by many conditions, making it not worthy for a powerful banker to place such great importance on it that he had to take on a stance of being hell-bent on acquiring it. After all, even if he didn't succeed, it would only be a difference in monetary profit. It wouldn't result in any losses. For the seller, Quarren, it's very normal to be under external stress to sell his shares for cash. It's also very normal for him to be unwilling to see moneybags Baron Syndra's from the Conservative Party. But herein lies the problem. As a businessman, faced with a deal that isn't considered important, the political inclinations are something to be considered when prices are similar. There's no reason to reject the possibility of receiving an extremely high premium. Yet he had deliberately rushed to close the deal with Dwayne Dantes before Syndra's could make his final offer. It's as if he has a grudge with money or views the Conservative Party with extreme prejudice. And this doesn't match the current political climate. The Lone Kingdom's internal politics hasn't reached such a splintered state. From the looks of it, someone is forcing Syndra's to do this. And someone had designed a trap, using Quarren's 3% shares as the bait and me as the cover to lure Syndra's into the trap, wishing to achieve a certain goal. Klein looked at the street lamps under the night sky as he sighed poignantly. Based on my assumption, if I hadn't discovered the problem tonight and hadn't sent someone to Syndra's, the subsequent developments would definitely have me crushed by all kinds of seemingly incriminating evidence. And when the military or the Church of Evernight intervenes, there will undoubtedly be a twist in the evidence, incriminating Syndra's. During this process, just a tiny misjudgment on Syndra's part will result in him treating Dwayne Dantes as an accomplice of the mastermind behind this ploy. He would use a rather intense method in response, hammering the final nail in my coffin. As for who the mastermind was and their true goals, Klein had no idea. All he could do was confirm that Ma'am Mary likely wasn't aware of the truth. She was only used due to her anxiousness to preserve her control over the coin company. In short, she wasn't qualified to be deeply involved in the mastermind's ploy. Environment protection. New party. Conservative Party. Bankers. Acquisition. Framing. One word after another surfaced in Klein's mind, seemingly allowing him to see through the present calm in Backland. He saw the dangerous stirrings that were hidden beneath the surface. They existed for a long time and hadn't been quelled because of the Great Smog. It was even possible that it was just an extension of the tragedy. When all of these meshed together, mixed with the tense international environment, Klein suddenly thought of a word. Revolution. In that second, Klein seemed to catch a whiff of the impending storm. Together with the prophecy of the apocalypse, I wonder how much chaos and madness are brewing in secret. Currently, my main goal is to start from the military and investigate the truth behind the Great Smog of Backland. If I were to get caught up in this maelstrom, there's a high chance I'll get involved in unnecessary trouble. Perhaps it might expose my sequence powers, preventing me from continuing my act as Dwayne Dantes. Klein retracted his gaze, having made up his decision. It was to quickly extricate himself from the matter. As for Syndra's safety, he wasn't too worried. First, the former had the Conservative Party backing him, and he had his own faction. With him on alert, it would be difficult for him to suffer any further harm. Second, Klein didn't have any deep ties with him. Thus, providing a warning had already spoken volumes of his character. As for the truth behind Quarren's death, he had no right to carry out any investigations. All he could do was trust in the Nighthawk's rich experience, and the myriad of means to have a chance of finding the real clues. How should I extricate myself? As long as the shares are with me, it implies that I'll ultimately remain center stage. Get Ma'am Mary to acquire it ahead of time? That will be very difficult. She likely doesn't have the funds. Sell it to Syndra's? That will be in violation of the contract. Amidst Klein's flurry of thoughts, he gradually had an idea. His facial muscles twitched a little for some baffling reason before they relaxed. This was because what he wanted to do was something he had planned on doing but lacked the ability to do so. Furthermore, it would also benefit him by establishing an image, bettering his chances of entering high society. In the room adjacent to the balcony, Zio and Furs were observing the streets and garden. One of them was looking at the crimson moon that was half hidden behind the thick clouds. There was a prolonged silence. Only when Dwayne Dantes's lights were extinguished did Furs turn to look at her friend. She said in excitement and clear poignancy, "Being a tycoon sure isn't easy. If you were him, you might have gone bankrupt in 3 days and be sent to jail." Zio shot her a glance and said, "I can hire a powerful butler, a professional lawyer, and a capable business secretary to help me." Furs didn't continue putting her down as she said with a smile. If I were you, I would change all of it to cash, bonds, and property. I'll use the annual income they bring about to maintain a decent life. Just as she said that, she saw Zio frown slightly. She cast her gaze towards the first floor. What happened? Furs tensed up. Zio observed for a few seconds before saying, My spiritual perception tells me that an item or matter related to black magic has appeared. One of the biggest advantages of a sheriff was that when they were close enough, they could sense matters related to evil, chaos, and madness that weren't screened. Black magic. Furs was considered a senior beyonder, so she wasn't unfamiliar with that. Strictly speaking, anything that didn't pass through the 7 orthodox deities was considered as black magic. It included ritualistic magic that prayed to secret existences. In the typical sense, black magic referred to the use of flesh and blood, hair, and all kinds of strange items to cast strange spells. It partially involved evil gods, ones beyond her powers, the spirituality of the materials used, and the correct symbols and magic labels. Zio nodded heavily and said, Yes, it's on the first floor. I plan on taking a look. Stay here to protect Mr. Dantes. Furs kept silent for 2 seconds and nodded without wasting any time. Okay. After Zio left the balcony's half-open room, Furs took out Lamino's travels from a hidden pouch, prepared to immediately take action if anything amiss happened. Elsewhere, Zio nimbly and briskly arrived at the first floor. Following her senses, she arrived outside a room. After confirming that the target was inside, Zio was surprised as her expression gradually darkened. If she didn't remember wrongly, this room likely belonged to butler Walter, who had hired her. During her momentary daze, the black magic item or matter which triggered her spiritual perception vanished. Calm returned to the room as though nothing abnormal had happened. Zio hurriedly pressed her ear to the door and carefully listened, confirming that there was the breathing of a human inside. After waiting for a while, and seeing that Walter wasn't doing anything else, she returned to the 3rd floor with a look of suspicion. She recounted her findings to her friend and finally said, Do we feign ignorance or think of a way to remind Mr. Dantes? Furs thought and said, Perhaps the butler doesn't have any ill intentions? Let's keep observing. After deciding on their stance, she'd sked in wonder. I have to say that Mr. Dwayne Dantes is a really pitiful person. Not only was he used by others to harm Baron Syndras and get framed, nearly throwing him into jail and losing his reputation, but he also has a butler who researches black magic with an unknown motive. Sigh, I hope he doesn't lose his life because of that. On this front, he's only a helpless commoner. Zio nodded in agreement. If we're unable to determine the butler's intentions after 3 days are over, we can leave a slip for him to warn him. The next morning, Klein glanced at Walter in a normal fashion after having breakfast before leaving home with Richardson. He rode a cathedral to St. Samuel Cathedral. After the preaching and prayers, Klein didn't make any donations. Instead, he directly came to Bishop Electra. Is there something? Although this bishop was under immense stress due to the infiltration of Cheney's Gate, he was still rather friendly when dealing with the faithful. Klein smiled and replied, I've recently been involved in certain matters and have come to recognize my true self. Without waiting for Electra to inquire, he continued, I wish to establish a foundation that targets the poor. I hope that they can receive help from the church. I will place the Coin Company shares I have on hand into this foundation, so as to kickstart this initiative using all the funds obtainable from the contract. Electra was nearly stupefied by what he heard because it was definitely a sizable sum. Although it wasn't public knowledge how much Dwayne Dantes spent on acquiring the 3% shares, just from the relevant sources of information, it was estimated to be over £10,000. Furthermore, the future returns were nothing to scoff at. And back then, Ma'am Mary had been pursued by many men of status who had wealth in the range of tens of thousands of pounds. Therefore, for Dwayne Dantes to suddenly donate more than £10,000 was definitely considered a generous move. In the whole of the Church of Evernight, apart from donations from a deceased's will, there were only a handful of one-time donations that exceeded this amount. This is an act that deserves all kinds of praise, Electra said from the bottom of his heart. However, I have the obligation to remind you that you shouldn't do something that exceeds your reach. Klein smiled and replied, "This isn't a small sum for me as well, but it's still acceptable. It wouldn't affect my life and business." Electra's smile gradually turned warm as he said with a nod, "The goddess will definitely watch you." Upon hearing this blessing, Klein's expression nearly froze. Electra continued, "I will report the matter to His Grace and try to organize a charity party for this foundation. When the time comes, I'll invite the goddess's faithful from different domains. They will include powerful aristocrats and their families. Let's see if there are more people who are willing to participate." He knew very well that Dwayne Dantes was attempting to enter high society. Therefore, he had deliberately made mention of powerful aristocrats. Chapter 859. New mushrooms in the bottom cabin of the future where it was pitch black. Frank lit a candle which illuminated a table covered with flesh, mushrooms, wheat and fish. He casually pushed the items away and cleared out a space that was just enough to accommodate a piece of paper. Right on the heels of that, he spread out a piece of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and wrote with an excited expression, "My dear friend, Gairman Sparrow, I'm delighted to know that you found the dry mushrooms to be pretty good. Perhaps it's more useful than I imagined it to be. When I'm free, I'll take another look at them. As I've been fully focused in both body and mind, in the experiment you mentioned, I've already stopped all other creations. Most of the mushrooms have been burned away by Nina, leaving me with the last 3. I hope it will be of help to you. Placed together with them are my latest products. One of them is a type of mushroom that grows by feeding on flesh and blood. They have 3 breeds. The first is crossbred with wheat, and can be ground into a mushroom powder that can be used to make bread. Another has the characteristic of being mixed with milk, allowing milk to be drawn from them. The last has been crossbred with fish. They come with a refreshing taste, and it has a thick meaty texture. The things to take note of is that they are absolutely not to be eaten raw. They need to be cooked in 90 degrees Celsius hot water for at least 5 minutes, so as to kill any living characteristics. Otherwise, regardless of what it turns into, it will absorb the flesh and blood around it, including human organs. Another point. It's unable to distinguish between normal flesh and monster flesh, nor can they deal with the latter properly. They will accumulate with the corresponding toxicity and madness. I think they will experience different mutations because of the different types of monster flesh, producing different kinds of danger. However, I wasn't able to verify that, because I lack a sufficient number of monster corpses. If you were to obtain one while adventuring, please mail me one. I only need a tiny amount. As for any other problems that might exist, I'm not sure either. It's still a prototype, preventing further attempts and observation. I wish you all the best and to have a bountiful time adventuring. Sincerely, your friend, Frank Lee." After putting down the fountain pen, Frank read his reply in its entirety before folding in satisfaction. He found a gold coin and placed it over the letter. He quickly set up the messenger summoning ritual in preparation to chant the incantation. At this moment, he subconsciously surveyed his surroundings and was stunned. Then, Frank moved the nearby pile of soil out the door. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey was hiding in her room, observing the glass bottle in her hand. In the bottle was a translucent, colorless, sticky liquid. It was like a mirror when still, completely reflecting everything within its vicinity. When undulations happened, a very tiny whirlpool would silently spin beneath the surface. This was none other than the hypnotist potion which she had just successfully concocted. Audrey had already digested her psychiatrist potion, and planned on advancing to sequence 6 before Backlund's psychology alchemists contacted her. After using placate to quell her mental state, Audrey gently bit down on her lip, raised the glass bottle, and downed the potion. After a brief chill, she suddenly felt her mind seem to explode. Her body also seemed to be contaminated as it turned somewhat incorporeal. At that moment, her soul body, astral projection, and ether body were being absorbed and assimilated by her body of heart and mind. Her entire person was like an amalgamation of pure thoughts that began churning. She felt the boundless sea of collective subconscious which connected all living creatures, and she sensed the spirituality sky that stood in contrast. Having experienced the sense of alarm she received during her psychiatrist advancement, Audrey didn't panic. She ultimately maintained a sliver of lucidity and curbed her instinctive urge to fuse into the sea. She allowed her consciousness to spread out in all directions before contracting like a rubber band. After an unknown period of time, she finally found her inner self. She saw the back of her hand covered in dense, firm golden scales and saw that the hair on her shoulders turned luxuriant and heavy, as though they were really made of gold. After these anomalies receded, Audrey quickly recovered. However, when she looked into the mirror, she found her green eyes appear clear, but deep down was a strange bottomless whirlpool. It made it difficult for others to shift their gaze away from them, easily drowning within them. This is a sign of the dispersing spirituality that has yet to have been fully converged. Audrey slowly eased her brows as her smile turned bright. She looked at herself in the mirror and nodded gently, finding it hard to hide her smile. Audrey, you are already a sequence 6. After she calmed her emotions, she seriously introspected herself to determine her new beyond her powers and the qualitative changes. After some work, Audrey came to a rough understanding of the situation. First, her constitution had received a significant enhancement. Be it her strength or agility, it had exceeded an ordinary person's. She could also form a layer of scales over her skin, largely resisting and reducing any damage. Second was a qualitative change in psychological cue. It became a form of hypnosis within the non-combat domain. As long as she made the target focus on something, Audrey could open the door to their body of heart and mind and directly alter their conscious and affect their subconscious. This way, the target wouldn't notice that they were abiding by her arrangements, taking actions that didn't match their true intentions. Of course, if Audrey's arrangement directly harmed the target's life or something he subconsciously placed great importance to, then the target would produce an intense resistance, causing the hypnosis to fail. In addition, if the target had a strong soul and firm body and mind, they would be able to resist the hypnosis to a certain extent. Third, battle hypnotism. Audrey could forcefully hypnotize an enemy, making them do something abnormal, such as attacking their companions or avoid her, the hypnotist. However, such hypnosis only lasted for short periods of time. The target would quickly snap awake and sense the problem. Similarly, it was unable to harm the target's life and make the enemy commit suicide. Fourth was psychological invisibility. With one's control of the target's body of heart and mind, allowing oneself to remain in the blind spot of one's consciousness, she could achieve the effect of invisibility despite someone standing in front of her without being able to sense her. Very impressive. My only regret is that I still lack beyond her powers that can launch direct attacks. Audrey puffed her cheeks in an indiscernible manner as she tried hard to converge her spirituality and make her eyes less intoxicating. After mostly eliminating her abnormalities, she opened the door and let Susie in. With the help of her golden retriever, she began familiarizing herself with her new beyond her powers. Before long, her lady's maid, Annie, knocked on the door and entered with an invitation letter in hand. My lady, the church will be organizing a charity party on Saturday night for a newly established bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor. They have invited you. Audrey didn't directly agree as she asked, "Did they invite my parents?" "Yes, they were also invited, as well as Lord Hibbert," Annie replied honestly. Audrey nodded and said with a smile, "Tell the church that I'll be participating. Also, figure out the exact situation with the charity foundation, so that I can better decide on the amount to donate." In the evening at the Intis Srenzo restaurant. This place is truly dazzling. It's much prettier than the living rooms and activity rooms of many nobles. Furs looked around as though she was here to gather material. Although she had participated in many noble organized literature saloons, she had always visited them at their residences and not at such top-end restaurants. Zio grabbed at her coarse blonde hair. "This is the style of Intis. It's different from us. It might look pretty, but it lacks substance." "How does it lack substance?" "Look, those are all famous oil paintings and sculptures," Furs deliberately retorted. During this process, she suppressed her voice, as they hadn't entered by the main door. As she spoke, she found the private room mentioned by Walter. Furs directly used door opening and pulled Zio in. They hid inside a pantry cupboard and waited for their target of protection, Dwayne Dantes, and his guests to arrive. How much do you think the 3% shares of Coin Company is worth? Bored, Furs casually asked. In the morning, she had entered St. Samuel Cathedral with Zio to provide protection while feigning prayer. Zio hesitated and said, "At least several £1,000s. The bishop seemed to place a great deal of importance on the matter." "How rich? Donating thousands of pounds just like that. Why doesn't he save poor people like us?" Furs said poignantly in a joking manner. At this moment, the door to the room opened. Dwayne Dantes and Mock's family walked in and took their seats. The waiters also started rushing around. Zio and Furs didn't speak further as they eavesdropped on the chit-chat outside as they observed the surrounding situation. From time to time, their noses would twitch because of the food's fragrance. Suddenly, Zio frowned as though she had sensed something before quickly easing her brows as though nothing had happened. "What's wrong?" Furs leaned in towards her friend's ear and whispered. Zio shook her head. "Nothing. I was uptight, causing me to overreact." At that moment, Klein put down his fork and knife, glancing to the side with a normal expression. In his eyes, which had his spirit vision activated, a blonde, red-eyed head had appeared out of the void. In its mouth was a thick letter. Klein faintly caught the scent of milk, wheat and fish. The corners of his mouth twitched as he secretly reached out his left hand to grab the letter. And sitting in the other 3 seats, Mocked, Rihanna, and Hazel didn't notice anything. Klein stuffed the letter into his pocket without anyone noticing as a waiter walked out of the pantry, serving a new dish to the 4 customers. Among the dishes, 2 of them were butter-fried mushrooms. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly felt disgusted. His expression turned odd as his left palm that remained in his pocket trembled. Chapter 860. Runaway horse. Thankfully, it's not a mushroom dish I ordered, or else it would have been a waste of a dish. Despite believing that he no longer affected by the trauma inflicted upon him by mushrooms, the smell that came with the letter successfully made him suffer a relapse. Klein's expression rapidly restored itself as he retracted his left hand and placed it on the cup to his side, drinking the ice water inside. "Please give me another cup." As though nothing had happened, he turned his head and instructed the waiter who was at the door. At the same time, he pressed down his clothes and slowly got up while expressing his apologies before heading for a bathroom attached to the private room. It was opposite the pantry, placed on either side of the main door. Hiding in a cupboard, Furs heard footsteps approach as the bathroom's door opened and closed. She couldn't help but lean into Zio's ear and whisper in amusement, "It's the second time. They've been here for slightly more than 30 minutes, and Dwayne Dantes has already gone to the washroom twice. The first time was clearly to pee. If it's for the same reason, it means that this gentleman's kidneys, bladder, or prostate is problematic. He's coming out. He's coming out. He's really only peeing. TSK, he seems to drink plenty of water usually, and often heads to the bathroom. Sigh, it's difficult being a tycoon. But it's even more difficult being a good-looking tycoon in particular." Zio rolled her eyes. "What has that got to do with you? Focus and be serious. We're on a mission." Also, that bodyguard of the Member of Parliament named Mocked seemed pretty strong. He's probably a beyonder. We need to be careful. Furs had no choice but to suppress her desire to chat as she shrank back. They're guarding the area outside without being wary of others passing through the walls. How unprofessional. "All right, we'll chat when we're back." At that moment, Klein had returned to the table and sat back in his seat. He drank a mouthful of ice water, sipped on some white wine, and said to Mocked with a smile, "Having been here in Backland for nearly 2 months, I've been busy getting used to the environment and hadn't found the time to start a new business. Every day I wake up seeing money flowing out without any coming in. Haha, it's about time I do something." He indicated his willingness to participate in the arms dealing by cracking a joke. Mock stroked his cup and said with a warm smile, "I can empathize with that. In the beginning, I was in such a stage as well. How much money do you have to spare?" I can introduce you to some friends for a partnership. Klein replied in a calm tone. I'll be able to spare a maximum of £20,000 at present. You're richer than I imagined, Mock said with a heartfelt sigh. Under normal circumstances, a tycoon who had a liquidity of £20,000 was definitely someone whose overall wealth was on the order of £100,000. Not giving Dwayne Dantes a chance to be humble, he casually said, Didn't you buy 3% of the coin company's shares before? You can pledge it for at least £10,000. That will give you some liquidity. Klein immediately smiled and sighed. I have already donated those shares to the church. I plan to establish a bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor. You donated it to the church? Mock had yet to meet the priests or bishops of St. Samuel Cathedral today. Furthermore, he had been out and had yet to receive the invitation. Therefore, he wasn't aware of the new development. Ma'am Rihanna and Hazel, who were enjoying the delicious food, looked up as well, subconsciously casting their gazes at Dwayne Dantes. At their level, it wasn't uncommon to have friends they knew that could donate £10,000, but very few could donate that much in one go. And among these few people, there might not even be one who was willing to donate such amounts. No, there was one now, Dwayne Dantes. Yes. Klein nodded with his usual expression. If not for the goddess's blessings, I would have long died in the chaotic southern continent. And when I was young, if I had the chance to attend school and study, perhaps my life would have been completely different. Thus, I wish to give those children who desire to change their fates some hope. Your character is as amazing as your generosity. Rihanna lowered her cutlery and praised sincerely. Hazel also nodded indiscernibly. The way she looked at Dwayne Dantes turned significantly gentler. Seeing her parents begin an idle conversation over the charity, she excused herself and walked to the bathroom, seemingly pressing her right hand onto her abdomen. When she arrived at the door, she was just about to turn right when she suddenly turned her head and looked at the cupboard beside the pantry. She frowned slightly and revealed a look of confusion before retracting her gaze and opening the washroom's wooden door. When Hazel came out after washing her hands, she had apparently forgotten the abnormality that had happened. She touched the necklace at her chest and returned to the dining table. Dinner came to an end after the dishes and dessert were served. The four left the private room and met the two bodyguards outside with their servants. They were preparing to return home. At this moment, Hazel suddenly paused and said, I think I dropped my ear studs inside. Sorry about that. Please wait a moment. Without waiting for Ma'am Rihanna to instruct a waitress to do the search, Hazel turned around and circled around the bend, returning to the room she had been in. Hazel lowered her hand that held her left ear and directly entered the connected pantry until she was in front of the cupboard. She then placed her hand on it. She had planned on opening the door to the cupboard at an extremely fast speed, but after some thought, she decided to be cautious by holding on to her necklace with one hand and turning her body sidewards to prevent any sudden attacks from whatever was inside. As she held her breath, Hazel took the chance when the waiter was clearing the table inside to suddenly pull the door open, exposing whatever was inside. However, apart from some spare cutlery and tablecloth, there was nothing. Hazel once again wore a look of puzzlement, as though she couldn't believe the scene before her eyes. I clearly sensed something very valuable inside, she muttered under her breath and quickly closed the door before her maidservant chased up to her and walked out of the pantry. Outside the Intis Frenzo restaurant, Furs and Zio turned their heads simultaneously and looked inside. That girl actually noticed us? Furs whispered in disbelief and amazement. If she hadn't used door opening and sneaked out from the back of the cupboard, she and Zio would have been discovered, having no choice but to admit that they were secretly protecting Dwayne Dantes. Zio wore a confounded look as well. I remember that you didn't speak or move about when she was heading to the washroom. Perhaps. She's a beyonder as well, and has a certain type of spiritual intuition. Furs made an uncertain guess. Mr. Dwayne Dantes sure leads a difficult life. He often encounters the power struggles between tycoons and nobles while having a butler that secretly studies black magic at home. Furthermore, there are beyonders with mysterious powers living nearby. By the way, what's her name? Hazel. Zio was looking for Dwayne Dantes' carriage, preparing to hide underneath when her gaze suddenly froze. Furs, look. That person is acting oddly. Furs traced her gaze and saw a middle-aged man in a black formal suit. He was pacing along the sides of the street, looking very anxious and frustrated. How is he acting oddly? Furs didn't have the time to observe him carefully as she directly asked. Zio answered simply, he's dressed as a decent gentleman, but his shoes are very dirty. It's as though he hasn't shined them in a while. As you know, Backlund is covered in dust. Also, he would touch the area underneath his armpit. I dare bet that there's an underarm holster hidden there. Apart from that, his expression and attitude imply that he isn't normal. They're coming out soon. I'll head to the carriage first. Watch that person, and ensure that Mr. Dantes is protected. All right. As Furs found it troublesome, she also found it rather interesting. Hence, she retreated to an area that concealed her as she observed the entrance of the Intis Srenzo restaurant. Nearly 30 seconds later, Dwayne Dantes and the mocked family walked out. After bidding each other farewell, they headed for their respective carriages. At this moment, a two-wheeled carriage charged out from the end of the street at an extremely fast speed, as though it would topple at any moment. The horse that pulled the carriage wore a rabid look in its eyes, as though it had been alarmed. It charged for the Intis Srenzo restaurant's entrance in its panic. Of Mock's two bodyguards, one went forward in a bid to subdue the runaway horse, while the other protected the member of parliament and family. At this moment, the middle-aged man who had been loitering around had approached from the back and drew a revolver. With a warped expression, he aimed at Mock's head. Klein's right hand was raised indiscernibly, before he retracted it without doing anything. He nimbly performed a jump, dodging the runaway horse. At the same time, Furs, who was hiding elsewhere, clenched her palm gently and pulled to the side. The assailant's leg suddenly went limp, as though he had stumbled over something, as he fell to the ground, failing to pull the trigger. In his haste, he pressed down with one hand and immediately leaped up, planning to shoot wildly without aiming. However, when he squeezed his finger, he didn't feel any tactile feedback. The revolver had already dropped by Hazel's feet. Following that, he and the runaway horse was subdued by the bodyguards. Why did you attempt to assault me? Mock held back his churning emotions as he took a step forward, and asked with a deep voice. The middle-aged man immediately laughed as he shouted with a hysterical expression. It's you. It's all because of you and the others. You talk about atmospheric pollution, wanting things like anthracite. My factory is going bankrupt, my child is dying from an illness, and my wife has committed suicide. Chapter 861. Furs's dream. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's shout, and seeing his warped expression, Hazel's eyes, which were filled with rage and hatred, gradually froze before melting into a confused and lost look. It wasn't only her. Mocked and Rihanna, as well as Dwayne Dantes, fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. Even Furs, who had concealed herself, also lost the sense of excitement she originally had, no longer having that strong sense of justice. After more than 10 seconds, Mock stopped looking at his assailant, and turned his head to say to his bodyguards, "One of you stay here. Watch the scene and the suspect. Wait for the police." Having said that, he paused and said to his valet, "Get a few reporters to cover this matter." After preliminarily dealing with the matter, this House of Commons member of Parliament surveyed the area, and discovered that several passers-by were attempting to gather over to check on what was happening. He then looked at Dwayne Dantes and apologized with a smile. "My apologies for putting you in such danger. I never expected the matter to develop this way. We did consider the actual situation of similar factory owners and coal suppliers, and we had provided them some assistance and interim measures. Who knew? Coming up with a bill is something, but the actual implementation is an entirely different matter. When atmospheric pollution becomes abnormally pressing, and the various parties exert immense stress, it's no surprise that a cookie-cutter solution is employed." Klein sighed and said with a self-deprecating laugh, "There's no need to keep my feelings into consideration. I've been in even more dangerous situations in the past." On the surface, It appeared as though he was referring to his encounters when doing business in the southern continent's West Balam. In fact, he had recalled Megos, who was pregnant with an evil god's spawn, the terrifying meteor that had crashed down from the sky, Cynthia, who wanted to bear a child for Admiral Emirius, and the Rose School of Thought angel and numinous episcopate monster, who had collapsed the mountain outside Byam. Compared to these, what had happened here was like a drizzle. He didn't even need to consider his own safety since there was Zio, Miss Magician, and Hazel. He didn't even take action besides dodging normally like any experienced adventurer would do. His focus was on whether this would result in a storm. Mock sighed and nodded. I can tell that you're very calm. I once doubted your experiences, but now I'm convinced. All right, Dwayne. Let's return home separately. Leave the rest to the police. If there's a need to take a statement, they will do it at your residence. Klein nodded and said to Mocked and family, be safe. Mock nodded seriously and sighed once again. Backlund's social season has just begun, and this happened. Cherish the peace we have now. Backlund's social season is marked by the return of the House of Lords members of Parliament. It seems to have begun since last weekend. And this week, 2 cases have happened consecutively. The harm dealt to Baron Sindras, and the assault on Member of Parliament Mocked. As he thought, Klein didn't stay put. He brought Richardson, who clearly looked a little shaken, and walked towards his carriage. When he got into it, he watched the scenery fly backward as he sighed and half closed his eyes. He was presently unable to determine if the assault hadn't involved beyonder powers, as everything that had happened could be done by ordinary people. As for the middle-aged man, he had sufficient reason to do so. This didn't need deliberate fabricating, as Klein believed that in Backlund at present, there were more than one former factory owner or employer that had lost their livelihood because of similar developments. The only thing that felt questionable was that Mocked was the target. Although the House of Commons were the supporters, advocates of the environmental measures, often making relevant speeches and are interviewed by the papers, he wasn't the most obvious target during the passing of the bill. In comparison, there was a higher chance that members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council were picked as targets for revenge. Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he slowly opened his eyes. Seeing that it was already dark and cloudy with rain already pattering down, once again, he realized how the maelstrom hidden beneath the seemingly calm Backlund surface was intensifying. Reining in his thoughts, Klein raised his left palm and tapped his pocket. And it was what he believed to be Frank Lee's reply and some unknown mushrooms. Klein really yearned to return home to head above the gray fog, and used the newly received mushrooms to communicate with creeping hunger, doing so to regain the use of the sealed artifact. With the storm already brewing, he believed that there was a need for him to quickly be returned back to his optimal combat strength. And in this aspect, creeping hunger was essential. Unfortunately, he had 2 Beyonder bodyguards following him, so it was best if he didn't head above the gray fog for the time being. I clearly don't need any protection, but I spent a few £100 to hire 2 people to restrict my actions. How helpless I am as a tycoon. Klein finally sighed inwardly as he raised the cup of black tea that had just been prepared by Richardson. He took a sip as his facial muscles tensed up before relaxing. Klein looked down and discovered that there had been twice the number of lemon slices in his black tea than usual. He glanced at Richardson in an unnoticeable manner, and he saw that his valet was in a daze, as though he was still lost in the horror of the assault. As cowardly as usual, Klein commented inwardly as he placed the porcelain cup on the table. Late at night. 39 Backlund Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel sat before her dressing table, looking at the gray rat sitting on a powder box. After a long silence, she said, "Was my father wrong? The matter he pushed for is clearly a good thing. There is nothing that is beneficial to everyone. There will always be those who benefit and those who suffer from it. At such times, a relevant bill or plan requires thought, compensation, and aid. If your father had done them, the problem isn't his. Conversely, it also means he's cold and ruthless," the rat said perfunctorily. Hazel recalled for a few seconds and relaxed her expression. During dinner, I sensed that there was something very valuable hidden inside the cupboard in the pantry. But when I later got an opportunity to open it, there was nothing. The rat was taken aback as it said in thought. Perhaps that was Dwayne Dantes' bodyguard. He was recently embroiled in a suicide case, and it's said that it involves Baron Syndras. Hiring a bodyguard to protect him in secret is normal. The bodyguard inside the cupboard might also possess supernatural powers, carrying mystical items with them. That's why you were able to sense it. Hazel nodded gently and accepted the explanation before subconsciously muttering to herself, I wonder what kinds of supernatural powers those bodyguards have. After saying that, she swept the gray rat with a puzzled look. How do you know Dwayne Dantes was embroiled in a troublesome case? The rat squeaked. My present state is very suitable for me to eavesdrop into the conversations of others. As it spoke, it looked in the direction of 160 Buckland Street, the glint in its eyes shimmering. Based on the sleeping rotation, Furs was asleep as she felt herself float to an ancient and majestic castle. In it were all kinds of beyonder ingredients and mystical items. There were even 2 blurry tarot cards. However, she didn't take any of them away, as they were sealed by an invisible force field. Furs looked around in an attempt to find the means to remove the seal. Finally, she saw a complicated symbol drawn at the top of the dome. It was a symbol formed from fate and concealment. If I find an item engraved with this symbol, I'll be able to unseal some treasure. Furs immediately came to a realization when she snapped awake. She discovered that she had curled into a ball on the carpet in the room. She had a thin silk blanket covering her. She and Zio didn't dare sleep in the reclining chair, afraid that Dwayne Dantes, who often sat in it, would notice something different. Rubbing the edges of her brows, Furs sat up and saw Zio having her back to the wall of the master bedroom. She was seriously listening for any stirrings. As Furs walked to Zio, she said with a frown, I feel that there is some secret hidden here. I had a strange dream, dreaming of an exaggerated treasure trove and a complicated symbol. As an astrologer, she instinctively believed that there was a problem with her dream. Noticing the serious look on Furs's face, Zio suppressed her words of doubt and said after some thought, Perhaps there really is some sort of secret. I once heard a proverb regarding the mysterious world. It goes, when a beyonder element is discovered somewhere, there must be a second one. Ignoring the butler who we can't tell if he possesses beyonder powers or not, that Miss Hazel is someone with a beyonder element around her, or should I say that this street likely has a second one. Furs nodded gently before laughing. However, it has nothing to do with us. We will receive our remuneration tomorrow evening and terminate this bodyguard mission. We will leave this place. The most pitiful of all is Dwayne Dantes. He's innocent and ordinary, but he ends up involved with troublesome matters and beyonder elements. Having said that, Furs looked in Zio and joked, Quickly wish him that the goddess would watch over him. I'm a believer of the god of steam and machinery. I won't be able to do so. Zio seriously considered for 2 seconds before drawing a crimson moon on her chest, piously muttering, May the goddess bless Mr. Dwayne Dantes. Furs was snapped out of her reverie as she covered her mouth and yawned. I'll head out to patrol the building. It's your turn to sleep after another 15 minutes. All right. Zio was clearly more awake than Furs. Furs immediately headed for the door and pressed on the wall with her outstretched hand, arriving at the corridor. She was just about to walk to the staircase when she sensed that there was a slight stir coming from the room of Dwayne Dantes' valet. Furs's eyes darted slightly as she cautiously headed over. She opened a tiny door in the wall and peeped in. She then saw Richardson jumping a crazy dance that had a tinge of mystery. A spirit dance? Doesn't this valet believe in the Evernight goddess? He's secretly worshipping death? Furs frowned as she watched Richardson finish his spirit dance, softly praying for death's protection to help him avoid all kinds of danger. After everything came to an end, Furs scared and shook her head. She silently said to herself, what a pitiful man Mr. Dantes. Chapter 862. Kind warning. After returning to the room with the balcony, Furs looked at Zio, who had her back against the wall, and whispered, Guess what I saw? That male servant, Dantes' valet, is actually a believer of death. He was dancing a spirit dance and praying. Zio widened her eyes before relaxing her expression. When it comes to Mr. Dantes, that's the least of his concerns. Yeah, that valet named Richardson is clearly of Southern Continent heritage. Perhaps he was born there, so it's not surprising that he worships death. Furs replied with a smile. I know. I just find it interesting. Aren't there a little too many people with secrets around Dwayne Dantes? I won't be surprised if I were to discover one day that all the living beings in this building except him, including the housekeeper, maids, gardeners, carriage drivers, earthworms, bugs, and rats are related to mystery and beyonders. I would be able to easily accept that reality. Zio rolled her eyes. If that were the case, Mr. Dwayne Dantes definitely wouldn't be a simple person. Having beyonders and supernatural creatures around him means that he might be the spawn of an evil god or a grounded angel. Without waiting for Furs to expand the scope of the conversation, Zio asked, "Didn't you say that you had a strange dream involving treasure? Why aren't you curious or considering what it symbolizes? That perhaps it might actually exist?" Furs chuckled. "Such a dream often implies trouble and danger. I'll consider it again if I have a chance of encountering that symbol." Although she said that, her true thoughts were, there's quite a bit of a problem with that dream. Who knows if there's a ploy behind it? I'll consult Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, and Mr. World at the tarot gathering next week before deciding what to do. They are experienced and powerful beyonders. Perhaps they have had similar experiences. You've matured. Zio nodded, and exerting strength in her back, she bounced off the wall and walked to the spot where Furs had been sleeping before. Mature? Furs scoffed and leaned in towards her friend. She straightened her back and looked down at her friend's hair. Without waiting for Zio to become enraged, she sighed. You're the one who matured. I still remember this time last year. You did things based on instinct, arbitrating with your fist. From time to time, you would commit mistakes without realizing it and become lost. You're much better now. Zio was stunned as she lay down and covered herself with the thin silk blanket. With her back facing Furs, she grumbled. The main reason why I got lost was because of you being a burden by my side. Furs chortled and nodded in thought. That's a characteristic of an apprentice. It has nothing to do with me. Get it? Seeing Zio on the floor, she walked to the wall adjacent to the master bedroom and seriously started being a bodyguard. As the night slowly passed, the sky gradually lit up. Klein got up to have breakfast and received visits from 2 batches of policemen and a batch of reporters. They were here for further investigations regarding Quarren's suicide case, while another was to obtain more details regarding Member of Parliament Mock's assault. With Walter's help, Dwayne Dantes met them and quickly handled the matters. In the afternoon, Mock suddenly visited and urged Klein, "Join me at the club for a game of tennis." He was a member of a few clubs, but there was only one club that overlapped with Dwayne Dantes, East Balham Military Veterans Mess. This is to confirm the arms deal? Klein managed to read between the lines and immediately got Richardson to get his coat, top hat, and cane. He rode on his carriage and headed to the sandy yellow unique building at Hillston Borough with the Member of Parliament. They entered the club and used the same room as before. Klein once again met the long-faced Army colonel from the Ministry of Defense, Calvin. After habitually exchanging pleasantries for a few minutes, Calvin finally focused on the main topic at hand. He looked at Dwayne Dantes and said with a chuckle, "I heard from Mock that you can have £20,000 available? Although it will make me tight on funds, it's true that I can," Klein replied with a smile. Calvin nodded in satisfaction and said after some pondering, "There won't be any need for £20,000 for now. The batch of firearms, explosives, and small number of cannons reserved for you is in a particular warehouse in East Balham. There's not that much, enough to equip about 3,000 to 4,000 people. Based on the price of decommissioning them, it will cost £10,000 at most. Of course, you will have to give me £15,000. He didn't mince his words in any way, as though this was common in the lone military. "No problem," Klein said and nodded calmly. Calvin immediately chuckled. "Excellent. Mock has a keen eye for people. A person who wants to do such business absolutely mustn't be stingy. That batch of firearms is worth at least £20,000 in West Balham. If you can find a suitable buyer and fully showcase your experience in the area, it's entirely possible to sell them for £30,000 or even more. By the way, the transportation fees and escort fees will be borne by you. We will only send 2 or 3 personnel to assist you. As expected, there will be monitors. Klein listened in silence, believing that it was time that he urged Admiral of Stars and Danitz to quickly provide him with information on West Balam. He pondered for a moment and said, "Roughly when will it begin?" "That batch of firearms will take another 2 weeks before being placed in the corresponding warehouse. When it happens after that period is up to you. You don't have to pay it in full at once. You can first pay £8,000 to £10,000 and pay the rest when everything is settled." Calvin wore an expression as though things were highly negotiable. 2 weeks later. "That will be closer to the end of the month. I'll definitely have to wait until the party of the Snake of Fate's birth before leaving. I'm still waiting for his placenta blood." Klein's thoughts raced as he said, "I'll need to carry out some preparatory work. I'll probably head to the southern continent in early July." Calvin exchanged looks with Mocked and gently rubbed his palms. "No problem." Outside the East Balam Military Veterans Mess, Zio and Furs hid themselves on the roof of a nearby building, monitoring the people that were coming and going. Zio knew that there were many Beyonders in the club, so she didn't dare get Furs to sneak her in to provide protection to Dwayne Dantes at a close distance. All they did was wait outside. Thankfully, this is Backlund. Even though there's no smog this season, there will be no lack of clouds. The sun wouldn't be too strong. Otherwise, my skin would definitely turn red. Furs mumbled as she hid herself in the shadows. Zio was about to say something when she saw a carriage drive into the back door of the club. It was entirely brown in color and had a trademark coat of arms. It was made of flowers and rings. Viscount Stratford's carriage. Zio silently mumbled as she hurriedly widened her eyes and focused. She then saw a familiar figure who was a stranger to her get off the carriage. Surrounded by bodyguards, the figure entered the East Balam Military Veterans Mess. "What's wrong?" Furs noticed her friend's abnormality. Zio didn't conceal the matter as she frankly said, "I saw Viscount Stratford. He also came to this club." "That captain of the Royal Guards?" Furs asked in surprise. "Yeah." Zio nodded heavily. Furs turned agape, hoping to say something, but she was at a loss as to what to say. All she could do was look around, pretending to monitor for anything that was amiss. After a while, she saw Dwayne Dantes walk out. 160 Buckland Street received another guest in the afternoon. This time, it was the largest shareholder of the coin company, Ma'am Mary. "I'm very sorry that my request embroiled you in such trouble. I never expected Baron Sindras to do something like that. Poor Quarren. He was planning on bringing his family to Winter County for the summer." Mary Schott apologized with hints of anger. Klein replied calmly, "I agree with your views on Quarren. He was really unfortunate. However, this matter probably wasn't done by Baron Sindras. It might be a trap that's targeting him." Mary nodded heavily. "I've heard of the theory. It said that the police department is planning to hire a skilled forensic pathologist to dissect the corpse to search for any missing clues." Her final sentence was automatically replaced by Klein as, "The police department is planning to hire a skilled spirit medium from the Church of Evernight to examine the corpse to search for any missing clues." "I wonder what will be discovered." Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. "May the goddess give Quarren peace and that the true murderer behind his death will suffer punishment." Mary responded in the same way before saying, "In order to prevent you from being affected by this matter, I plan on purchasing the shares from you ahead of time. I'll add an additional £1,000 above the highest price to date. You don't have to worry about my funds. I've recently been busy borrowing money from the banks." Klein sighed and replied, "I'm very grateful for your kind intentions, but any advance transferring of the shares will need to be done with the church. I've already donated it to them. I plan on using the income one received to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor." This was the first time Mary was hearing of such news. She was momentarily stunned and speechless. After 10 seconds, she exhaled and said, "Your character, generosity, and wisdom truly impresses me." As she said that, she looked at Duane Dantes with an additional look of admiration. Klein humbly diverted the compliment to the goddess before pausing. He then asked with a stern expression, "Ma'am Mary, I have a question that I hope you can answer. When you decided to clash with Baron Sindras to protect your control over the coin company, was it purely by your own will, or a result of persuasion by others?" Mary frowned and frankly replied, "All the persuasion that was directed at me was to ask me to give up." Klein immediately fell silent as he didn't discuss the matter further. He casually mentioned Member of Parliament Mock's assault before sending the lady out of 160 Buckland Street. After dinner, Walter came to the half-opened room with the balcony and said to his employer on the reclining chair, "Sir, the 2 bounty hunters have been dismissed. It cost a total of £300 for 3 days, excluding the food provided. They're finally gone." Klein immediately relaxed as he nodded, acknowledging his butler's reply. Following that, he eagerly entered the master bedroom, planning on taking out the mushrooms sent to him from Frank Lee, and bringing them up above the gray fog to communicate with creeping hunger. When he came to the desk with the hidden mushrooms, he saw a letter held down by an ink bottle. Klein picked it up in puzzlement and tore it open. He quickly scanned it as his expression turned odd. "Dear Mr. Dantes, we are the bodyguards you hired. In the past few days, we discovered certain matters that we feel obligated to inform you. Therefore, we entered your bedroom to leave this letter while you were having dinner." Chapter 863, Charity Party. Your butler might be researching black magic. Your valet is secretly worshipping death. Someone among your neighbors has supernatural powers. The street where you live might have certain secrets that cause people to have strange dreams. You should understand some of the terms mentioned. We won't provide a further explanation. May the goddess bless you. Klein looked at the letter in his hand as he was momentarily unsure whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds, he couldn't help but give a self-deprecating laugh. Just from the contents of this letter, I'm really quite pitiful. And the matters described don't seem to be problematic in any way. As he shook his head with a smile, Klein held a letter in one hand and suddenly shook it to the side. Scarlet flames surged and devoured the piece of paper. Regardless, Miss Zio and Miss Magician are rather kind people. The only problem is that what they mentioned are things I already know. In fact, I'm more aware of the reasons than they are. As Klein mumbled, he found the mushrooms he had hidden. There were a total of 4 breeds of mushrooms. One was 3 dried products that could react with water and fish. The second was a new breed with golden caps as they emitted the smell of flour. The third was white with specks of black spots. They were swollen and puffy, as though a liquid was flowing within them as they exuded the smell of milk. The fourth had strange gills running down its 2 sides. Their surface was filled with dense and soft scales. Klein swept his gaze at these mushrooms and took out a gold coin. He caught it after flicking it. After confirming the results, he took off the ordinary glove he previously wore. With his bare skin, he grabbed the 3 new mushrooms to test various scenarios that Frank Lee hadn't mentioned. They felt normal to the touch, and there weren't any changes to the mushrooms. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, no longer afraid that the level of danger they possessed had exceeded his capability. He was previously afraid that these mushrooms would immediately produce roots upon contact with items of flesh and blood, devouring whatever was in its path to grow before dispersing its spores. Perhaps it's the relatively strong light from the gas wall lamps, or it might be as a result of plucking them which causes these mushrooms to lose most of their living characteristics. They will be revived only under special conditions, such as being in the stomach of a living creature. With the intention to figure out the truth, he drew all the curtains to the master bedroom and extinguished all the wall lamps. Then he picked up the new mushrooms with his bare hand and determined that there wasn't anything abnormal about them as they hadn't fed on his body. After doing this, Klein lit the wall lamps again and set up a ritual, sacrificing the mushrooms above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's seat, he wasn't in a rush to summon creeping hunger. He first summoned a metal bottle that had his blood inside to the long bronze table, Right on the heels of that, he poured a drop of blood on the table and piled the 3 new breeds of mushrooms onto it. In just a second, the mushrooms suddenly softened at the parts where they made contact with the blood. They squirmed as they enveloped the blood. Whatever they made contact with grew a dense array of needle-like hair. The corners of Klein's lips twitched when he saw that. He directly adjusted some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, suppressing all the mushrooms. Then he sent the drop of blood back into the metal bottle and closed the lid. He had roughly understood the characteristics of the mushrooms. Without wasting any time, he summoned creeping hunger from the junk pile. Holding the thin human skin glove, Klein placed it on the table and removed the seal around the mushrooms. Then he saw the creeping hunger support itself with its 5 fingers before standing up with great difficulty. It began retreating rapidly like it was playing a piano. "So you do no fear?" Klein revealed a genial smile. He pressed the glove down and gifted it with some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Then he grabbed a mushroom with his other hand and brought it close to creeping hunger. The human skin glove struggled with all its might, but ultimately failed to escape his grasp as it clearly began trembling. Klein stopped moving the hand with the mushroom and chuckled. "Are you still going to randomly praise the true creator?" Creeping hunger continued struggling without giving a reply. Klein thought for a moment before he compromised. "I'll allow you to praise once a day. In the day or in the evening." Creeping hunger's struggling weakened, but it didn't stop. "Teasy." Klein continued negotiating with an unperturbed expression. "Thrice a day. During breakfast, lunch, and dinner time. However, you will need to warn me ahead of time." Creeping hunger struggled twice before sprawling onto the desk, motionless. After another round of negotiations, Klein successfully reached an agreement with creeping hunger. However, eating daily was instinctual to the item. It was unable to be weakened much as a result of the negotiations. Therefore, he needed to wait for the sealing method provided by Azik. At present, what Klein could do was bring creeping hunger around without it eating. However, he needed to come up with a meal within 24 hours. How troublesome. Thankfully, after creeping hunger fused with Mr. A and the mushroom, its living characteristic has strengthened. Otherwise, there would be no way to make any negotiations with it. Klein commented wistfully. Finally, he did a divination regarding the recent matters, and he received a conclusion that there wasn't too much danger. He also got confirmation that Quarren's suicide was a result of the influence of a Beyonder. After busying himself with all of that, he left the gray fog and returned to the real world, and continued waiting for Mr. Azik's reply. On Saturday evening, Klein, who wore a formal suit, arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral with Richardson on a carriage to participate in the charity party. After passing through the main entrance, he was led by a priest to a huge adjacent hall. There was a baldachin with the sacred emblem representing the Evernight goddess placed inside. High above were a few miniature crystal chandeliers that hung down. In front of it were thin and long candles, as well as overturned round metal lids used to store wax. At this moment, all of them had been lit, illuminating the hall with brightness. It had quite a holy feeling to it. Klein glanced over and saw a series of neatly arranged seats and guests who wore out of the ordinary attire. Among them, the women mainly wore 2 types of clothing. One was dresses that were either bright or dark colors, and they were bold and liberal in their dressing, allowing one to see the fair flesh at their bosoms or their shoulders. The other type wore pure and fresh colors in relatively conservative dressing. Even their collarbones could hardly be seen. Some of them even had theirs concealed. Based on what Klein knew, this was the difference between married and unmarried women in the Lone Kingdom. As for widows and divorced, they could choose between the two. However, the former tended to choose darker colors. Aside from those, Klein also saw shimmering necklaces and exquisite earrings, as well as all kinds of valuable accessories. They were a lot more impressive than what the guests that attended the ball or banquet which Mocked and himself had hosted. After walking into the hall, Klein greeted the bishops, Mocked, and others he knew and exchanged pleasantries. At this moment, there was a sound from the door as many guests turned to look back, revealing their smiles as they walked over. When Klein looked over, his gaze first lit up before it froze. At the entrance to the hall, The most attractive one, there was a girl with lustrous blonde hair that softly cascaded down her shoulders. Her beautiful eyes were green like emeralds. They appeared like the sea which hid a maelstrom within, making anyone who looked at her unable to move their gaze away. Her facial features were pretty, and she had an outstanding bearing. Her looks were nearly flawless, making the men and women present find it difficult to notice what kind of dress she was wearing or the designer of her jewelry. However, Klein had swept his gaze to the necklace at her collarbone. A lustrous and perfect pearl was being embedded within the crevice between the intersection of her collarbone. It softened the lines at her neck, making her accentuate a clean and mesmerizing feel. Klein had met her before and he knew her. She was none other than the Tarot Club's Miss Justice. Back when she used magic mirror divination, Klein had seen her before. Immediately, Klein moved his gaze away, without daring to take another look. This was an instinctive reaction of his, as he knew that Miss Justice was a beyonder of the spectator pathway. If he garnered her attention, it was very easy for her to read his true thoughts and secrets based on the changes in his expressions and body language. But his racing mind quickly forced him to turn his head back as he continued casting his gaze at Miss Justice. He discovered that him avoiding her had made it worse and more obvious. How could a gentleman who liked all kinds of women not take a few more glances when encountering such an abnormally beautiful lady? At the same time, Audrey sensed the abnormality of a particular man. His sideburns are a little white. His looks and bearing aren't bad, making him appear profound. This is likely Mr. Duane Dantes, who donated more than £10,000 in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation for the poor. His reaction was a little odd, as though he was trying to hide something. To Audrey, Duane Dantes's act of moving his gaze away was actually very normal. She had encountered many similar situations in the past. Some men would indeed subconsciously turn their heads away after seeing her, as though afraid that she would notice it, or that they would make eye contact, exposing their moment of being mesmerized. Therefore, what was odd wasn't that Duane Dantes had moved his gaze away. Instead, he had turned his gaze back again. In addition, Audrey felt that the greatest problem was that the gentleman's emotions were more of shock instead of amazement. What's he shocked about? What is he trying to hide? With her questions, Audrey greeted her parents and brother, and the people that gathered over with a faint smile. Seeing Miss Justice no longer paying attention to him, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he began thinking, I need to be careful later, and play the role of Duane Dantes well. I mustn't let a spectator notice any problems. Regardless of whether Miss Justice noticed it or not. I've already thought of the excuse for my abnormal reaction. Miss Justice is indeed a lady from a powerful aristocratic family. I wonder what her last name is exactly. I'll ask Mocht or Bishop Electra later. Amidst his thoughts, Klein frowned slightly, having a nagging feeling that he was being watched. Following his spiritual intuition, he swept his gaze towards the door. Outside the door in the shadows, there was a golden retriever sitting there silently. Chapter 864. Actor and spectator. When the ghostly gaze of the golden retriever pierced through the curtains from the shadows, Klein's brows indiscernibly twitched as he failed to hide his alarm. He then naturally shifted his gaze away, and looked towards Miss Justice and company. How terrifying. Why is that dog sitting in the corner, hiding in the shadows for no good reason? It was silently looking at everyone in the hall. Miss Justice seems to have fed a spectator potion to an animal, and had once asked Mr. Hanged Man for advice. Don't tell me it's that golden retriever? 2 spectators, one out in the open and one in the dark. Which actor can handle that? In high society, Miss Justice and the dog are unlikely to be the only spectators. Her joining the psychology alchemists was a result of other nobles as well. It seems like it was done by Duchess Negan's sister? As Klein lampooned and analyzed, he walked to Mock's family and asked in a seemingly casual manner. The ones who just entered seem to be very noble people? Mock glanced Duane Dantes and chuckled. Eastchester Earl's family. You can directly call him Earl Hall. You should have heard of him. That's his wife, Ma'am Caitlin. That's his eldest son, Lord Hibbert. You should have already met him. Upon hearing Mock's introduction, Klein suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. This was because he had indeed met Hibbert Hall at the ball Mocht had hosted. However, he had failed to notice the Lord, or he wouldn't have raised the question. I was shocked by Miss Justice's sudden appearance. Klein maintained his smile and listening stance. Mocht continued, "That's his daughter, Miss Audrey Hall. In the social scene over the past 2 years, she has the title of being the most stunning gem in Backland. It's very apt, isn't it?" Without waiting for Dwayne Dantes's reply, he minced his words by saying, "She is courted by princes, duke heirs, and many honorable excellencies and gentlemen." Mocht's concealed meaning was clear. He was saying to this man, one who liked all kinds of women, not to place his sights on the lady. She was a target he had no thoughts of making contact with. As for Klein, he was having other thoughts. So Miss Justice is Earl Hall's daughter. It's no wonder she's so rich. It's no wonder she's never bargained. Earl Hall is one of the top bankers in the kingdom. He's the most influential member of Parliament of the House of Lords, and one of the hereditary peerage. His wealth is much more than Baron Syndra's. Even if Miss Justice is unable to inherit the aristocratic title and family estate, the wealth she will inherit will be at least £100,000. With her looks, birth, and character, she is indeed the best choice for a marriage partner with the royal family or powerful nobles. However, the way she has been repeatedly buying mystical items doesn't look like she's someone with a wealth of only a few £100,000. She's able to claim it from her father? I also wish to have one like that. Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein replied to Mocht's warning with a smile. I've heard of the various rumors about Miss Audrey. It's only today that I have realized that they aren't that exaggerated. Unfortunately, I'm not a prince or the heir to a duke, marquis, viscount, or earl. Otherwise, I would also be one of her pursuers. He was implying that he knew his status and standing. Mocht didn't continue the topic, and began introducing the various guests he knew to Dwayne Dantes. He had truly led him into high society. Of course, the greatest supporter involved in this was the Church of Evernight. Without the charity party they held for the foundation, Mocht wouldn't have the chance to bring Dwayne Dantes to meet so many honorable people. Marquis Lawkent, Earl Gross, Viscount Loveland. The aristocratic believers of the goddess separately exchanged pleasantries with Dwayne Dantes with a rather genial attitude. Before Mocht was done with the introductions, an elder walked into the hall. He was wearing a black clergyman robe with red accents. By his chest hung 5 dark sacred emblems. He was clean-shaven, and his eyes were deep, dark, and tranquil. Including Earl Hall, everyone turned to face the elder and respectfully bowed. "Good evening, Your Grace." This elder was none other than Saint Anthony Stevenson, one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of Evernight. He was the person in charge of the Backland diocese, and he was part of the upper echelons of the church in the true sense of the word. When Klein saw the archbishop, his body and mind involuntarily trembled as he found it difficult to hide it. It was as though he stumbled upon a grave on an unlit village trail back when he was young. He swept his gaze and saw that the other guests didn't have any strong reactions. He immediately realized that the horror, which Saint Anthony carried with him, was more clearly felt by people with stronger spirituality. He hurriedly entered cogitation in an attempt to calm himself down. When he managed to control his trembling, Saint Anthony had already smiled. He surveyed the area and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. "Praise the Lady! Praise the Lady!" The guests at the charity party replied one after another. With the archbishop's arrival, Mocht stopped introducing Klein to the other guests because the party had officially begun. According to convention, everyone would take their seats and piously pray to the goddess for 3 minutes. Following that, the cathedral would begin singing and walk to the baldachin, and use their ethereal, uniform, and seemingly cathartic voices to praise the goddess. After the religious ritual ended, Electra received St. Anthony's instructions to stand to the side of the choir. There was a podium there with all kinds of books placed on it. "Everyone, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Your character is a resplendent star in the serene night." Electra first said a few words of pleasantries before saying, "Our establishment of a bursary foundation that targets the poor stems from Mr. Dwayne Dantes's suggestion. He is truly an honorable gentleman. His piousness and character are impeccable and a definite role model to others. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Dwayne Dantes to give everyone a brief speech. Although Klein was already prepared, he drew a gasp inwardly when he heard the last sentence. This was different from usual. There were 2 or even more spectators around. It wasn't something that he could bullshit through if he wanted to. The content of his speech needed to be sufficiently realistic, without them being able to see through his lies or fake examples. Pressing down his clothes at his abdomen, he quickly stood up and walked to the podium as he buttoned his suit. Coming behind the podium and steadying himself, he surveyed the nobles, members of parliament, clergymen, and high-ranking civil servants. He said with a smile, "I'm a little nervous. This is my first time being stared at by so many people of such honorable standing. I was once active in a region where the poor gathered. I was active in the chaotic southern continent and thus saw many things. There was a young lady who helped her mother make pasted matchboxes from the age of 6. If she didn't do that, they wouldn't even have the money to buy rye bread after paying rent. The rye bread they eat is filled with mill feed, and occasionally, they will bite into gravel or rocks. The hardness make it usable as a rod to attack others. When this girl gradually grew up, although she led a laborious daily life, and her family lacked any additional funds, she still looked forward to the night schools run by the church. She wished to study how to read in order to grasp knowledge. This is because she knew that only by doing so could she stop living the way she did. Only by doing so would she not starve and be able to wear clothes that could really protect her from the cold. She wouldn't need to work at factories with harsh conditions and end up dying in her 20s. Klein had selected a portion of the experiences of the poor kids he had met before, merging them together as he conveyed them with his true feelings. He could clearly see many ladies more or less reveal looks of empathy. A number of girls even had their eyes flicker, such as Audrey Hall. She really is an easily moved child. I've acted from the bottom of my heart. I've even moved myself, much less a spectator. However, most gentlemen aren't moved. Some of them seem to already be aware of the situations of the poor. Some do not mind those of the lower class. Klein swept his gaze as he continued. Our industry has been developing. In the future, we will definitely need more literate workers. Our election criteria has been relaxed. In the future, the ones who are eligible to vote will definitely include most of the educated. With the empathy towards these poor children and my expectations of the kingdom's future, I've decided to donate all my Coim Company shares that I have on hand to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. It lets them have the opportunity to enter official institutes of higher learning after attending the free night classes. Earl Hall, who had a beautiful mustache, nodded when he heard that. He was the first to raise his hands to gently clap. Amidst the vigorous applause, Klein returned to the seat belonging to him. Bishop Electra headed up and announced, "The shares that Mr. Dwayne Dantes donated are valued at £15,000. We would use it to establish a lone charity bursary foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you agree with him and pity those children who thirst for knowledge, you can contribute to this foundation." As he spoke, he pointed at the donation box beside him. Audrey retracted her gaze and pressed the corner of her eye and said to her father, "Father, I plan on donating £1,000. What about you?" As she spoke, her mind quickly summarized what she had observed. Dwayne Dantes has likely lived a lower-class life. His pity, empathy, and speech were all very realistic. Those poor children are truly pitiful. Just now, when the bishop mentioned that the shares were valued at £15,000, the corners of his lips twitched unnaturally. From the looks of it, he likely feels the pinch over donating the money. However, the sincerity of him donating it doesn't seem fake. This means that he's a gentleman who loves money, but he loves kindness even more. Why was he shocked when he saw me, and what is he hiding? He has seen me somewhere before but doesn't know my identity? But there's no need to hide that. He identified my necklace as a mystical item, so he was shocked before trying to attempt to hide this matter? If that's the case, it means that he's definitely a beyonder, one that isn't a low-sequence beyonder. I'll ask Susie later when I'm back. Perhaps she noticed other details. She was hiding in the darkness, so he wouldn't be on his guard against her, allowing her to discover more. Amidst her thoughts, Audrey saw her father smile as he took out a checkbook and fountain pen. The value he wrote down was £10,000. Chapter 865. Earl Hall's suggestion £10,000. Audrey blinked as she used a very slight change in expression to express her surprise. Without needing her to voice out her question, Earl Hall had noticed her puzzlement. He chuckled and said, "This is an insightful man. His ideas have inspired me and resonated with me. Besides, we can't ignore the misery that objectively exists just because it cannot be resolved anytime soon." Audrey vaguely understood her father, but she felt that she didn't fully understand him. She nodded slightly and took out her checkbook from her purse that matched her dress and wrote down the £1,000 value. This was a charity ball. Furthermore, it was held in a side hall of the cathedral, so there weren't any dances or extravagant arrangements. There weren't any valets or ladies' maids following by their sides. It was simply a charity event that had some degree of donations involved. The ladies undoubtedly brought their bags on them. The guests subsequently threw their checks into the donation box and headed for the 2 long tables for some beverages or simple food, after which, they walked around the hall socializing instead of sitting. This was closer to that of a buffet party. Klein also accompanied Electra and came to St. Anthony's side, and was introduced to him. St. Anthony smiled in response to Dwayne Dantes' greeting. He sized him up and said, "Very good. We are proud to have a believer like you. It's the goddess that has taught us that character is more important than status. Therefore, you are an extremely honorable gentleman." To be frank, faced with this saint, Klein's heart was drumming because deities or beyonders related to the fate domain was able to see the gray fog's aura on him. For example, everyone from the monster pathway, or the Evernight goddess who wielded the authority of misfortune. As for St. Anthony, if he was a high-sequence beyonder of the sleepless pathway and grasped beyonder powers involving misfortune, then there was a chance that he could see that there was a problem with Dwayne Dantes. As such, Klein had headed above the gray fog to divine, so before attending the charity party, he received the answer that there wasn't any danger. Since the goddess didn't say anything, even if her archbishop were to discover some problems, he will probably feign ignorance. Klein replied with a warm smile. "I've been to the cathedral frequently to pray and listen to Bishop Electra's preachings in recent times. Even my soul seems to have been cleansed. Therefore, I abided by the goddess's teachings to pass such beauty and hope to others." St. Anthony nodded and said, "In front of the goddess, all believers are differentiated by their character. Regardless if they are nobles or commoners, male or female, they are all the same. I hope those people who live in poor environments will liberate themselves of fear and receive serenity." Praise the Lady. Klein and Electra tapped their chests 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the Lady. Seeing St. Anthony turn towards the other believers, Klein planned on heading over to the table to get a glass of champagne to quench his thirst. At this moment, he saw a gentleman approach him. This man had somewhat loose skin with an obvious potbelly. However, it could be seen that he was rather handsome in his youth. Even now, his blue eyes that had a smile on them and his beautiful mustache made him appear good-looking. Klein had previously learned from Mock's introduction, and knew he was the House of Lords Member of Parliament and powerful banker, Earl Hall. Of course, to him, the most important identity of this noble was that he was Miss Justice's father. And Audrey happened to be by his side. She was observing Dwayne Dantes with her bright eyes, awaiting her conversation with the gentleman later. This made Klein immediately feel a little uncomfortable. I need to present the persona that matches Dwayne Dantes. A person of ordinary birth who's working hard to get himself into high society. At this moment, he's bound to be a little nervous and restrained. Likewise, a gentleman who loves beautiful women will feel the same feelings when faced with the most stunning gem in Backlund's eyes. But he will also unknowingly showcase his own breadth of knowledge, and show his charms to express his desire. Yes, an experienced tycoon who survived the chaos must be someone who has pride and confidence hidden in him. No matter what he faces, he will try his best to appear calm, respectful but not sycophantic. Klein's thoughts raced as he smiled and politely said to the approaching Earl Hall, "Honorable Earl, I happened to see the check you donated. Your kindness and generosity truly impresses me. Yet, you've never flaunted that or informed others how much you've donated. Earl Hall chuckled. No, compared to you, the price I pay is far inferior to what you made. Between the lines, he meant that £15,000 might be a tenth of Dwayne Dantes' overall wealth, or even a fifth, but £10,000 to him was just a thousandth or even lesser. Clearly, the former paid a greater price, and his willingness to do was even more pure. From my point of view, as long as the poor who yearn to use knowledge to change their fates can be helped, all donations are kind and sufficiently benevolent. From this angle, the only difference between £10,000 and £15,000 is just £5,000. Klein tried hard to express his sincerity as he deliberately glanced at the listening blonde girl, without leaving a trace. He knew that an ordinary without a trace was obvious in the eyes of a spectator. Audrey wore a faint smile as she silently listened to her father's and Dwayne Dantes' conversation, as though she hadn't noticed the gentleman peek at her. This made Klein lack confidence from his failure at receiving any feedback in his performance. Earl Hall laughed and said, "Then we shall agree to disagree. This isn't anything bad. At the very least, we are praising one another. I can tell that you once had a difficult period and had once led the life of the poor." Klein nodded and said, "I do not avoid such a past. They are my valuable riches. And this is something me and my friends lack," Earl Hall commented with a smile. "And it's because of this that you possess a unique and wise point of view. I hope there will be opportunities in the future to work with you." "That is also something I look forward to," Klein replied with a suitable level of sincerity. Earl Hall pointed to the side and said, "A couple of friends are waiting for me. I hope that your charitable ways and wealth keep increasing." Klein didn't drag on the conversation as he drew the crimson moon on his chest. "Praise the lady! Praise the lady!" Earl Hall and Audrey tapped their chests in a clockwise fashion in unison. Watching them walk past him and in another direction, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he tensed up as he naturally looked around the hall and noticed the shadow at the door. Silently sitting there was the golden retriever. On the carriage back to Empress Borough, Earl Hall, who looked like he was resting with his eyes closed, looked at his daughter and said, "Audrey, didn't you mention that you wished to join one of the church's charitable organizations? Are you interested in joining this bursary foundation?" Audrey had already sensed that her father might have such thoughts back in the cathedral, so she expressed the appropriate level of surprise and confusion. "It's only a small charity foundation." Audrey's brother, Hibbert Hall, argued for his sister. Earl Hall shook his head and laughed. "I've asked a few bishops. The total amount of donations tonight has already reached £100,000. Why do you think there's so much?" Hibbert frowned slightly as he said in thought, "They were bribed." At the same time, Audrey gave her own point of view. "Knowledge and the relaxing of the electoral qualifications?" Earl Hall nodded and sighed. "Nothing is an essential existence, including humans themselves as well as the nobility." He then looked at Audrey and said with a smile, "There's no need to force yourself. I can get others to join the Bursary Foundation. I just wish that you will gain more knowledge because of this and now view certain matters as definite and immutable. Even if you miss this, there will be other charity organizations." "Father, I'll consider it," Audrey replied seriously. After hearing Dwayne Dantes' recount of the stories of the poor, she had already decided on joining to gather more donations, to contact the government, and organize events to contribute her efforts to the cause. She was hesitant because she felt that the middle-aged man was a little problematic. After returning home, Audrey immediately brought Susie to her room and closed the door. "What's your take on that Mr. Dwayne Dantes?" Audrey asked directly. The golden retriever sat opposite her and thought, "He seems to know you or something on you. Also, a lot of the time, he's acting and leaving a certain degree of clues. He seemed to be guarded against me. He's extremely sharp. Yes, I noticed it too. He might be a beyonder. He acted very well, but it's still an act. However, this is also very ordinary. At a social event, and faced with different people, We would all play different roles and engage in a corresponding act, Audrey said in thought. The biggest problem stems from his shock when he saw me. He was almost horrified. Also, he was embroiled in 2 cases, one after another, especially with that case regarding Baron Sindras. It seems to have some beyonder elements involved in it, with signs of someone being cued to do so. Susie gaped her mouth, unable to give a definitive explanation. All she could do was woof. Audrey began another train of thought. I'll get someone to investigate Dwayne Dantes, and after confirming that there aren't any major problems, I'll join the Bursary Foundation. Alright, it's almost Monday. I can request Furs and Mr. Moon. They're both in Backlund. Monday afternoon at 3. Dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Audrey quickly surveyed the area and looked to the seat of honor at the bronze, long table and bowed with a smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Chapter 866. Home. Upon hearing Miss Justice's greeting, the Fool Klein suddenly had a strong wistful feeling. After knowing her identity, status, looks and situation, he had a deeper understanding as to why Audrey's tone had a happy and radiant air. He understood where they essentially came from, but he didn't end up envious or jealous because of that, nor did he believe that she lacked the toughness that was brought about by misery. Instead, he felt that in this world that had chaos, warped, and madness underlying it, having such a lady exist was really nice. A smile surfaced on his face as he gently nodded as an acknowledgement of Miss Justice's greeting. After the Tarot Club members exchanged greetings, Katlia nudged her glasses and turned her body sideways. She bowed in the direction of the blurry figure that was enveloped by gray fog at the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, there are 3 diary pages this time. Queen Mystic has finally come online again. Klein lampooned and said with a smile, very good. A few seconds later, Katlia conjured the diary pages after receiving approval before seeing them leap into Mr. Fool's hands. Klein glanced at it casually when his heart skipped a beat. He realized that the diary pages provided by Queen Mystic depicted Emperor Roselle's early days. It didn't seem to contain anything important. Logically speaking, when being unable to distinguish the importance of entries, one will definitely prioritize the later diary entries. This would best restore the mystery as to why Emperor Roselle was agitated. I believe Queen Mystic is sufficiently clever. As Klein wondered to himself inwardly, he began seriously reading the first page. September 21st. Arrived at St. Millom. I've officially begun my first state visit. Faceax weather is really a little cold. It's not even October, and it looks like it's about to snow. It's no wonder it's famous for its various coats and winter wear, as well as its liquor. Fuck, the people here are ridiculously tall, as expected of a country that descended from giants. However, I have to say that I hate it when people look down on me. Tonight, I'll be going to a bar to find a Faceac beauty to share some drinks. Upon reading this, Klein suddenly suspected if Queen Mystic Bernadette's question was if she had a brother of Faceac descent. Holding back his tsking inwardly, Klein swept his gaze to the second diary entry. September 22nd. I think I blacked out. What happened last night? What happened to my Faceac beauty? I actually lost out to her in drinking. The embassy staff told me that the women here are often better at drinking than men. I should show some temperance when I head to bars in the future. I sure don't want some ugly, middle-aged woman to do unspeakable things to me when I black out. The alcohol here sure is strong. My headache has lasted an entire day. Thankfully, my stomach doesn't hurt. I should sleep early. I'll be visiting the Great Twilight Hall tomorrow. September 23rd. The Great Twilight Hall is indeed grand. It's like a myth materializing into reality. That building seems to be completely prepared for giants. Since I don't share their faith, I could only circle the perimeter. The square at the bottom of the Great Twilight Hall is also filled with the fragrance of alcohol. There were plenty of people there, some kneeling, some sitting, others playing musical instruments. They exude a rather relaxed and open feeling. I got to know a Faceation who blows a bone flute. Compared to his kinsman, he's ridiculously tall. He's roughly 3 meters tall. His name is Honegger, and he claims to be from one of the clans in Faceac that have the purest giant bloodline. The way he plays the bone flute looks very sorrowful, as though he doesn't belong here but has no idea where to go to. Compared to the skirt chasers at Intis, he's a lot more like a poet. Now that I mention it, I really can't help but give some criticism. Those guys seem to wear any sexual diseases as a badge of honor. It just messes up the entire social market. I had a chat with Honegger for a while and raised my question from before. He said that he's only homesick. But the problem lies in the fact that he's a true blue native from St. Millum. He has never left this place before. Honegger didn't immediately reply to me as he played the bone flute for a few more minutes. He later told me that he misses the origins of the giant bloodline, the giant king's court mentioned in myths. He told me that he and his clan of Phasacians often dream of tall mountains that are used as giant city walls. It's a palace forever bathed in twilight's glow, with tall towers and other kinds of buildings. It resembles the Great Twilight Hall, but it's even more fascinating, epic and miraculous. Without anyone needing to tell them, Honegger and his clansmen believe that it's the giant king's court. Towards the end of our conversation, Honegger slowly stood up and thanked me for listening. He was going to leave Faceac to seek out the giant king's court, to find the home of his soul. He believed that in the zone at the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, there might be a path that leads to the giant king's court. He said that a millennia has passed, but the giants have never forgotten their home. Now it's his turn to follow the footsteps of his ancestors. This path would never stop until the destination is reached. He played the bone flute again and gradually left amidst that ethereal and sorrowful tune. Home, home. Upon reading this, Klein felt for the first time that his feelings resonated with the emperor. Although Roselle only wrote the word that seemed to repeat without describing his feelings, Klein could understand the undulating feelings within the emperor. This was because he and Roselle were like Honegger. They had a home they belonged to spiritually. Sighing inwardly, Klein flipped to the second diary page. January 10th. Visited Sonia Island. This place is also called Ancient Elf Island. It has plenty of elvish ruins and customs left over. I was surprised on the first day. The elves actually make blood cake, and they enjoy eating animal organs and are good at using spices. They even invented chopsticks. Thinking about the elvish depictions on the murals, apart from their blue hair, their facial contours and eyes are similar to Asians on Earth. Could they be my fellow countrymen? Yes, back then I had such suspicions as well. However, it's impossible for so many people to transmigrate at once since it's almost an entire race. I felt that I was overthinking matters. But it doesn't make sense that the customs and cutlery that appears on Earth won't appear here. Klein thought in interest as he quickly continued reading. He wanted to know if Roselle had gotten to the bottom of it. January 13th. I've been so busy searching for writings, relics, and folk tales that I forgot to write my diary for a few days. Although many objects have been taken away by the various churches, I've still obtained something of value. Various legends have it that Elf King Sanayathrim created chopsticks. There are records of him using animal organs and blood to cook delicacies. There are stories of this ancient god being good at identifying and using spices. It's acknowledged that he is their founding ancestor, the first elf. Due to certain reasons, he led the race and left the western continent that only existed in legends, bringing them to the northern continent. Could it be that this is a fellow countryman of mine, a transmigrator? He later produced an entire race? There's nothing ancient gods can't do, including having children? He apparently had a wife who was also an elf. I'll need to think this through. January 16th. After further investigation, elves might really have nothing to do with transmigrators. At the very least, they didn't leave behind any Chinese, English, or other symbols. They have likely been using Elvish all the time. Nothing of it gives me a sense of familiarity. Furthermore, the inventions we have in common didn't appear before I came. Likewise for famous quotes. There are only proverbs and idioms with similar meanings, but with a completely different choice of words. From all the items and legends I have now, none of them support my theory. This is a little disappointing, but it also makes me relieved. If I were to encounter another transmigrator or other transmigrators, I really have no idea how to face them. January 17th. I dreamed of the home I've nearly forgotten. Indeed, the emperor more or less gave up on that theory. Klein flipped to the next page and saw the final diary entry. April 2nd. My daughter is smart. She can speak before the age of 1. Although she has only learned a few words, I believe that her subsequent development can't be slow. She must have inherited this from me. No matter how I look, she looks a little like how I looked like on Earth. Could it be that a soul will also bring about some level of inheritance? Haha, I'll just treat it as so. Bernadette, this name is quite good. It sounds beautiful, but deep in my heart, I keep having the urge to give her a Chinese nickname. Sigh, she won't get to see her real grandmother and grandfather. April 3rd. I suffered from insomnia last night, because of the wistful thoughts I suddenly had yesterday. Thankfully, I know cogitation. However, this also made me consider a problem. That is whether I should secretly teach Bernadette Chinese. No, I can't. If she were to understand the diary entries her father had previously written, I'd rather kill myself. In my daughter's heart, her father is filled with honor. However, using Chinese to write my diary is my final tether to Earth and my past. My daughter should inherit this tether to a certain extent. April 6th. After a few days of consideration, I've decided to teach Bernadette 2 Chinese characters as though they are special symbols. I'll tell her that this is a protective incantation that her father is giving her, and that she is to remember it forever. She doesn't need to know the corresponding meaning. All she needs to do is to remember it. The word in Chinese is home. Home. Klein repeated this word again, as he felt his eyes redden a little. He finally understood why Queen Mystic had chosen these 3 diary pages. This was because it was the protective symbol her father had left her. Home. At this moment, Klein seemed to see a river of emotions. Its surface was flowing silently, but there were infinite eddies flowing underneath, churning without end. Klein retracted his gaze and made the diary pages disappear. Looking up at Katlia, he asked, "What's your question?" Chapter 867. Investigation mission. When looking at Katlia, Klein had actually guessed what her request would be as he sighed and felt confident. How did Mr. Fool know that I'll be asking a question and not making a request? As expected of Mr. Fool, Katlia thought before politely asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I would like to know the meaning of these 2 symbols." After receiving permission, she conjured the Chinese characters. They were Gu and Xiang. As expected, Klein sighed silently. When combined together, they mean home, the homeland for one's soul. When combined together, the homeland for one's soul. Katlia placed the emphasis on the second sentence, because she knew very well where home was for Queen Mystic, nor did she believe that it was anything special. Audrey, Alger, and the other Tarot Club members took the opportunity to learn the new Roselle text, and tried hard to memorize the symbols and their combined meaning. Except Derek. Klein didn't speak further as he leaned back into his chair. "You may begin." Alger immediately turned his head and looked at the world. "Your mystical item is ready. I'll give it to you this week." He was referring to the mystical item made from an ocean songster's Beyonder characteristic. The artisan had first rushed to finish Miss Justice's glove. As for the world's request, it had been delayed until this week. With Mr. Azek not replying yet, and with me unable to restore the seal on creeping hunger, this mystical item's arrival is timely. Klein controlled the world and made him nod. That's still an acceptable speed. An acceptable speed. If I had delayed it for another 2 to 3 weeks or even a year, would you be teleporting to me? Alger thought with a baffling sense of wariness. As his original plan was to obtain the cataclysmic interror potion from the church, and with him just beginning to digest the ocean songster potion, he wasn't looking to purchase any corresponding Beyonder ingredients. He fell silent again, and began watching the other members begin their transactions. To Alger, the most important thing now was to obtain 1 or 2 mystical items to match with Whip of Mind. After all, although mystical items were more about quality than quantity, with the need to avoid having the negative effects stacking with each other, To only have one mystical item for a Sequence 5 Beyonder was quite an embarrassment. Under normal circumstances, Sequence 5 Beyonders would have 2 or 3 mystical items whose negative effects didn't overlap, making them the best combination. Of course, Alger had already reserved one. Once the artisan finished the world's item, it would be his 6-winged gargoyle's core crystal. For that, he needed to pay £1,000. Together with the fee he needed to pay for the world, the little amount of money he had was reduced by £2,000, leaving him with £1,800. Out of that, £500 was a commission he had earned from Miss Justice's glove. With no one speaking, Emlyn looked at the sun and asked after some deliberation, "I need a Sequence 5's artificial vampire's Beyonder characteristic. What do you wish to get in exchange?" In recent times, he had learned that the Sanguine had the means to eliminate the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic, but he needed to make sufficient contributions to make an application. Therefore, Emlyn wished to first obtain the main ingredient needed for advancement before considering the other problems. Based on his observations, such a Sequence 5 artificial vampire Beyonder characteristic roughly cost £8,000 based on Mr. World's pricing. As for himself, he only had £5,400 and was still a little short. Based on Emlyn's original thoughts and habits, he needed to save up £8,000 before requesting a trade with the sun. He wasn't a sanguine who liked to buy things on credit, even for the newest and best doll. Nor could he thicken his skin to borrow from others. All he would do is be more frugal, work harder and save up more. However, he quickly realized something. The sun didn't accept cash. To the residents of the City of Silver, loans cash was no different from scrap paper. Therefore, Emlyn believed that the sun would make a request for an item, so it was better to learn of it to prepare it ahead of time. Furthermore, the sun doesn't understand the market prices. Perhaps the thing he wants only costs £5,000. In the hopes of being pleasantly surprised, Emlyn lifted his chin slightly and looked at the sun beside him. Derek thought seriously and said, Sun Pathways Sequence 5 Potion Formula. He originally wished to request him to repay his debt with Mr. World, but he realized that Mr. World hadn't raised any requests at all. Hence, he didn't find it appropriate to relegate it to someone else. In addition, having participated in so many tarot gatherings, Derek was no longer the newcomer who knew nothing. With the City of Silver having an exchange standard, he knew the difference between a Sequence 6 Notary Potion Formula and a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic very well. Using the former to cover the debt of the latter would be a terrible deal. Therefore, he changed his request to the Sequence 5 Potion Formula. Sequence 5 Potion Formula. That's very difficult to purchase. It will cost between £4,500 to £7,000. It will mainly depend on how urgent both parties are. Also, there's a cost to verifying its authenticity too. Emlyn was just about to answer when he heard Mr. World's hoarse voice sound, "I have it." Instantly, the palace that looked like a giant's residence fell silent. All the Tarot Club members appeared a little wooden. Is Sequence 5 that common? Emlyn felt down when he realized that he still wasn't at Sequence 5 yet. After calming down, he asked, "How much will it cost?" Considering Emlyn White's financial situation, Klein made the world chortle deeply. £5,000. Priest of Light Potion Formula. £5,000? Emlyn was first taken aback before he said without hesitation, "Deal." It was like he was facing a discount for a doll he had been longing for. All right. The world nodded as though it wasn't a major transaction. Then he saw Miss Justice look around and hear her say, "I'd like to commission an investigation mission." Investigation mission. The fool Klein's heart skipped a beat as the world's expression turned somewhat sluggish. "What is it?" Furs asked proactively. Her impression of Miss Justice's commissions was that they were relatively simple, while paying handsomely. She definitely needed to take it. Audrey organized her words and said, "There have been 2 matters that happened in Backland recently. One is Baron Syndra's. He was suspected to have been framed. The other is Member of Parliament mocked being assaulted because of the environmental measures." Furs found Miss Justice's description especially familiar because she had been present for the 2 matters. She had witnessed them and was involved in them. She unknowingly straightened her back, waiting for Miss Justice to continue. And in these two matters, there is a tycoon named Dwayne Dantes involved. He came to Backlund 2 months ago, and he had donated more than £10,000 of shares to the Church of Evernight in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. Audrey described using a tone as though she had never directly interacted with him, and was simply suspecting something about him from the data and rumors she had received. I wish to hire someone to investigate the actual situation with that gentleman. I know this too well. He's rather rich and he looks pretty good. He handles matters with experience and in a mature manner. He's someone with kidney or bladder problems. Furs nearly raised her hand to shout out her thoughts. If Miss Justice wasn't pleased with that, she had even more information, such as Dwayne Dantes was in a rather pitiful state. His butler studied black magic, his servant worshipped death, and one of his neighbors was a beyonder. There was a secret to his street, and that he had donated the shares to extricate himself from trouble. In short, he perfectly fits the image of a foreigner who is being bullied. I nearly recommended him a medicine that treats kidney and bladder problems. After all, Mr. Moon is skilled in such matters. I can still earn a commission through this. Yes, there's no rush. Let's hear what Miss Justice has to offer. Furs curbed her heart, which was awash with excitement as she patiently looked at the girl beside her. However, her body language and emotional upheavals had betrayed her in front of a spectator. Audrey was rather surprised and puzzled by this. She never expected Furs to know Dwayne Dantes and seemed to know quite a lot about him. This made her have a new guess as to why Dwayne Dantes was shocked when he saw her. She suspected if Furs had once said or shown something to the man. Meanwhile, Emlyn was a blank. He knew nothing about what Miss Justice had mentioned. All he could do was confirm that these happened in Backlund. As for the fool Klein, who was leaning back in his chair, leisurely looking at the members, he nearly twitched the corners of his mouth. Miss Justice's commissioning of others to investigate Dwayne Dantes had exceeded his expectations. This was because they had only met once at the charity party. They didn't seem to have any deeper interactions, so there was no need for any further investigations. Could it be that I exposed something about myself that garnered Miss Justice's interest? Or could it be that by donating £10,000, it shows how much importance Earl Hall places on this? Hence, Miss Justice decided to secretly carry out investigations because she's worried for her father? Klein's mind raced as he hurriedly thought of a solution. At this moment, Audrey deliberated for a moment and looked at Miss Magician and said, "An initial investigation for £500. If you encounter danger, causing the difficulty to rise, I'll compensate you with more." "No problem." Furs hurriedly organized her words inwardly. Just as she was about to say something, she saw the World Gehrman Sparrow raise his hand. He had raised his hand. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.